Welcome, everyone. Madam City Clerk, can you do the roll call, please?
Did you say roll call? Okay,
Yes.
I'm sorry. We have Councilmember Sinks.
Here.
And Councilmember Willie.
Here.
And Vice Mayor Chow.
Here.
And Mayor Scharf.
Here. And Councilmember Paul called. He will be here in about 3 minutes. But since we have a very long night, we can get started. So the first item is the study session and demonstration regarding options for unofficial transcription of City Council and Commission committee minutes. So do we have a presentation?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is a brief demonstration. Your next item on the agenda is a study session regarding improving communications with and effectiveness of advisory commissions and committees, and types of minutes to be kept, including the possibility of an unofficial transcript as a supplement to official action minutes, will most likely be part of the discussion. And so in advance of that study session, staff wanted to show you a brief demonstration of a free post-event transcription service through YouTube. Currently, all Council, Planning Commission, and Parks and Recreation Commission meetings are streamed on YouTube. So Bill will load the YouTube website, and he's going to go to www.cupertino.org/YouTube. On this screen, you will see all of the videos that are done by the City Channel. You can either scroll through them, as Bill is doing now, to find what you want, or even better, you can go to the search icon, type in your request, for example, the July 8th, 2019 council meeting. So that video becomes your first search selection. You're going to click on the meeting. If you want to read the captions as the video is running, you can hover over the video and click on the CC, which stands for subtitles and closed captions. And after the Pledge of Allegiance here momentarily, you will see the captions appear below the video as the words are spoken. So give it just another 5 seconds.
Great. Can we have the roll call, please?
Okay. In order to view a transcript of the video, you will click on the 3 dots below the video and then click on Open Transcript.
So, Madam Clerk, do we have any postponements?
You will see this transcript appear either to the right, as in this case, or below the video, depending on your Windows settings. The timestamps are live, and you can click on one of them, and it will take you directly to that portion in the video, as you so choose. You can also search this transcript for specific words by clicking Control F. And then let's say you want to go directly to the closed session report out. So Bill will type in closed session or closed. The word will be highlighted, and then you can click on that timestamp, and it takes you directly to that portion of the meeting. The transcript is approximately 85 to 90% accurate because it is done by machine and won't always be able to capture correct proper names or places, for example. You can also copy the entire transcript and paste it into a Word document and search text that way. And as he's doing that, just a note that, so you can search text this way as well, and the timestamps are also listed in case you wish to, if you find a word that you want, go to that video portion of the transcript in the video. So just a note that YouTube provides this free transcription service for videos up to 4 hours. And for meetings that go longer than 4 hours, the City Channel will create 4-hour segments that are separated into parts.
Yeah, I mean, we would never have a city council meeting longer than 4
Never.
hours, would we?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good.
Second, I second that motion.
Okay. Yes, part 1, 2, 3, I think, was actually the last council meeting. So additional information regarding other transcription options and cost will be discussed and deliberated during the regular agenda later in the meeting. And so this ends our demonstration, and I or Bill are available for questions.
Great. So we've looked at other options too that are not free, and that's going to be presented later?
That is correct.
Okay.
We have some you can go with an outside transcription service or our current vendor, Granicus, at a cost, but we can discuss all of those options and costs later in the meeting. And this is just kind of to give you a little flavor of it, as you talk about your commission study session in case it's helpful.
Great. Okay. Anyone have any questions?
I do.
Go.
Okay.
So this is a service provided by YouTube. It's not on our, and it exists today, right?
It does. Bill can probably give you some more techie answers, but yes, we transmit all of our meetings also through YouTube.
So, as long as our segments, the only thing we're having to do is chop up our meetings into 4-hour segments.
That's exactly right. You can still do
Okay.
it. It can just be in 4-hour increments. So if it's longer than 4 hours, it'll be part 1 and part 2.
Okay. And then, obviously, you have to go to that part in order to search
You can-
on
yes,
key phrases that you care about. So
That's
you
right.
have to be aware. So, and I know this is only questions because we're going to deliberate on this later, but just to help me think about this, the fact that it's not accurate, not perfectly accurate, but it's characterizes, it looks really good. 85 to 90% is actually a huge improvement from what I saw 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure to the extent that we, in our Granicus system where we would make reference to this, we could indicate that it's not guaranteed to be perfectly adequate and accurate, and that there are these limitations so that there are 4-hour segments, right? But could we create a link to this YouTube video?
Yes, absolutely. On our agendas and minutes
Okay.
page, where the video is and written communications, et cetera, agenda is currently posted, we can put a link to the YouTube meeting there.
And we could also have a disclaimer or something that,
Of course, yes. And this would
Yes.
be an unofficial transcript.
right, not produced by
only.
us, we're not responsible for it, but may be very helpful to a public that says, all I want to hear about tonight is, I don't know, Valco, or, yeah, okay. See, I made you smile, didn't I? Or all I want to hear about tonight is what are they doing about Lehigh, and then people can
Yes.
use this service to do a search from arguably the company that has the most advanced search technology in the world and has for a darn long time, right? Thank you.
You're certainly welcome.
So for the link, I suppose we can also put that in the description of the video, right? So the video
yes.
description, can we list all the agenda items and provide a link to the
Well,
segment of the video?
the link would appear under, for that meeting. So it would be clear which meeting it was for, if that was your question. And then the video would show up and the transcription would appear.
I guess
clear
no,
I
I
understand
mean,
your question.
for this particular council meeting, July 8th, 2019, agenda item 1, 2, 3, 4, if I'm interested in agenda item 5, could there be a link under the video description? I can click on agenda item 5, it will jump to hour 2 semicolon 15.
Well, I know our
And then
current
that would
video
jump
does
there.
that. Our current video does that. I'm not clear if the YouTube video would do that. The YouTube is mostly for transcription, which is what we're talking about in this case.
So
Yeah,
Grace, if I,
but then it will be very convenient if we can add that manually maybe, but
so Vice Mayor Chow, if I may, so what we could do is on the agenda page itself, there would just be a link to the meeting. That link would take up, and if there's part 1, part 2, part 3 meetings, within that, we could actually title part 1 agenda items X through X plus whatever, and then we would have 3 meetings. So it could be agenda items 1 through 4, the next one would be agenda items 5 through 8, and then the next one, agenda items 9 through 10. So that we could do.
But if I want to find specifically agenda item 5, I will still need to go through the 4 hours of video to find that.
You would have to kind of scan through the video, through the transcription. What you would normally do, though, is you would do a search, because there's probably a term that's specific to that agenda item, and look for that term and then find it that way. This isn't a perfect system, but that's pretty much what we can get.
Or we
to at
limit
this
our
point.
meetings to 4 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any speaker cards on this item?
And
None for this item.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question. I looked at this, our city council meeting used to have something called summary minutes. It will, for each public who spoke at the meeting, there will be one sentence description, what their comment is about, for or against something, or it's just a certain issue they bring up. We do have that. And then we used to also have summary minutes that summarize the deliberation of council members and even staff presentation. I noticed that up until last year, maybe before November 20th, when the council changed it, the Parks and Rec Commission, Bike Ped Commission, I think Public Safety Commission, all still have summary minutes. So I can go back and see what the Parks and Rec Commission talked about in terms of park master plan and what public members spoke when they come to the meeting. But right now in the council meeting, for example, it's called action minute, but the list of public comments there will be just a name. You don't even know what topic they are speaking about. So that makes it, I think this public spend time to come to make their 3 minutes comment. It would be nice if we at least capture what each person's concern is. So instead of having everyone going through that, because at least we have been providing that in-house until last year. So I'm wondering what's the cost that we have been doing for like Parks and Rec Commission. What was the cost last year for these commissions? And also, did we capture those in our commission expenses for producing these summary minutes? Were they expensive? I don't know. But I find them very valuable now that I go back and look at them.
Well, Vice Mayor, so there is a council policy since 2002, actually, to provide action minutes for city council, because there is a videotape of the meeting, and it's much easier for people to hear context in a video. This came back to City Council probably about 10 years ago, and the City Council at that time also chose to keep action minutes for City Council. Now you're about to speak to commissions.
However, I have checked the council meeting minutes. Up until 2015, we have been providing summary minutes for council meetings. There was also a summary of what each speaker spoke about up until 2015. It's just in 2014, it was still pretty detailed. And there was a capture of like Gilbert Wong said what. And so different council members said what regarding a certain item. In 2015, there was still that. But in 2014, there was very detailed. 2015, the summary become more and more scarce, and then it disappeared.
So did we do that in-house when we did it, or?
It's
was
always
this-
been done in-house.
So someone's staff did that?
I can't say. I'd have to go back and look at that. I don't know why different things have not been. We've been trying to go toward action minutes, which is what the City Council had approved. However, we can certainly, council can
But
discuss this and
at
the
least
future
Bike Ped and Parks and Rec commissions still have summary minutes pretty detailed until last year.
Well, I was only referring to council minutes, so you're about to have a discussion and study session on your commissions, and I'm assuming this will come up and in your next item regarding minutes for commissions.
Yeah.
So-
We had big feedback from commissioners that they appreciate summary minutes because they don't have a lot of actions a lot of time.
But I do
So-
also know that, as far as the transcription, there's some different video equipment that's happening in the conference rooms that are going to allow for videotaping, which could also be used through the YouTube, for example, to provide a transcript. So that's why this item we wanted to bring this item before you spoke about your commission item in case it was helpful.
So can we find out the cost for in-house summary?
Well, I mean, that will just be staff time.
Well,
We have to find out
we
how
would
much.
If council so wishes to not have action minutes for their city council meetings and move to a different type of minute, we could probably agendize that, I'm assuming, in the future. Right now,
I mean,
the
I
action
guess,
minutes
I mean, do we
is-
need both the transcription and summary minutes? I think both would be nice, but, it
But-
depends the staff time.
Yeah.
Are we going to
It's
have
a
to
bit of
hire
a
another
longer
person to do that?
discussion because summary minutes is also trying to summarize, 3 minutes of, let's say, a person's what they're trying to say, and it's a little subjective.
Right.
Also. So that's why many years ago, council, when the videotapes were available, council decided to go to action minutes at that time. that
But
could
we
be
have
that's a
been
different discussion.
capturing public comments up until 2015.
Okay,
So
okay.
there hasn't been, I guess, people complain about the description so far.
But that is a good point. With summary minutes, someone will be upset that what the summary says, they'll say, that's not what I really said. It's just like when I
We've
talk
had
to
that come up.
when I talk to a
That's
newspaper.
always been the issue, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, do you trust the clerk to document what was really said? And people would object. And so I think it was partially in response to that we said, fine. So, we provide excellent video service, and now it looks like we can get the transcript. And so, within the limits of that technology, which I would expect will continue to improve, people can be quoted for actually what they said rather than paraphrased by the clerk who might be spinning a story in a way that a speaker doesn't find appropriate, right? And that we did have that issue all the time previously.
Okay. Councilman Paul or Willie, do you have anything to say? Okay, great. So I think we are done with that one.
Thank you.
We can move on to the next study session regarding improving communications with and effectiveness of advisory commissions and committees. So let's have that staff report.
Hey, this is a report that was generated by a
committee
council
report,
subcommittee.
okay.
And so I'll go ahead and lead it off. Back in the late summer of 2018, there was a desire for examination of some of the composition of our commissions, and specifically the existence of a few of those commissions. And so there was some majority support for placing it on an agenda, which we did consider in the fall. But following community input, we decided to go ahead and instead reach out to our commissions to try to get some feedback as to how we could better improve the communications between our council as well as our commissions, with the general idea that our commissions are outward-facing. They help us interface with the public. They take discussion topics on particular items that are within the purview of the commission. And so in the experience of the commissioners, I believe that what they've found over the years is that there isn't as much communication going on between the commissions and between the commission and the council as could be going on, because you do have a point of interface. Sometimes with particular commissions, they have a work plan that gets presented to the council, but that wasn't consistent over the years. There was also a bit of confusion with regard to the rules of order and particularly what rules are employed by the council and the commissions. I think it's been pretty casual over the years, but the fact of the matter is that through this exercise, one of our staff members who very capably assisted with us, Katie Namura, pointed out that, well, actually, shortly after Cupertino was incorporated, there was a municipal code passed. I believe it was municipal code. Might have been a resolution, but they identified the Roberts Rules of Orders as the governing body of laws, of requirements for meetings. And so that actually hasn't changed, but that particular ordinance does identify a year. I believe it was something like 1965 or 60. It was back in the 50s or 60s that particular version of the Roberts Rules of Order. And they've evolved over the years, but we really haven't been that adherent, if at all, to that particular body of requirements. And so with regard to trying to figure out what would be a good way of reaching out to the community, communicating with each other, and also considering the idea that we do have staff coordinating our commission meetings as well as our council meetings. What is the nature of that interaction? So just to take one example, if you have a commission meeting and there appears to be a lack of business, there is no particular set requirement that a staff member coordinate with the chair or anybody in that commission before canceling that meeting. It was a policy recommendation of the subcommittee that's something that from the perspective of whether we'd like to be able to say the commission or the committee should be in charge of determining whether that meeting takes place. We wanted to make a definitive statement with regard to saying that is actually not really a unilateral staff decision. It's actually something that either the chair of the commission or the committee, or as was suggested by a member of one of our commissions in an email, I believe yesterday, perhaps a couple of commission members or committee members, or even the majority, should be making that determination as to the cancellation of meetings. There was one more item, and I don't want to put really too fine a point on it, but when we initially started this in the fall, we really wanted to find a better way to communicate ultimately with our public and with our commissions, and to really make for an environment that allows for better communication, better discussions throughout our community. And what ended up happening was that we did come back with a staff report and a bunch of materials that included a code of ethics. And I don't think that there's any aversion to having a code of ethics per se. And it's something within our subcommittee report that we are recommending that we have in the city. However, it was at best collateral to the reason that the topic came up in terms of communicating better with our commissions and having better intercommunications within the commissions and outward to the public. With regard to the recommendation of the subcommittee on that front, we are making a clear statement that we believe that a code of ethics is important, and from the feedback that we received from our commissions and committees when we issued a set of questions, 12 questions to each of the commissions and committees, there was no aversion to having that code of ethics. And so we've decided to recommend that our city manager, working hopefully in concert with our city attorney, generate a recommended code of ethics so that we can come back as a separate topic in an agenda item in the future and take public comment on what people would like to see based upon a draft recommended from the city attorney and the city manager's office. But with regard to the center topic here, we came up with a 9-page report. Vice Mayor Chow and I met many times ever since this was discussed since the earlier part of this year. Our agendas have been rather heavy, and so this has gotten pushed back a couple of times. But in terms of the subcommittee report, it's a fairly extensive set of recommendations as to what we've observed and what we've heard in terms of what our commissions and committees would prefer, have happen with regard to their ability to have communications with each other and with the council, and to be able to say, if we have particular projects that make sense in terms of cross-communicating between commissions, there's a mechanism for for that kind of involvement and encouragement within our policy to do so. So in that regard, we do recommend that between commission or committee meetings, that each of the members engage in 2 community-oriented events. And that was one of the questions that was asked by Jennifer Sheeran over email, who's one of our bike and pedestrian commission members, as to what was the nature of those events. And that was a recommendation generated by Vice Mayor Chow, but my understanding of it was that it was really more encouraging people to get out there into the community. You can go to another commission or committee meeting, but also interface with the neighborhoods and the residents in their various groups and report back. So we have 9 pages of recommendations. I won't go over every single one of them, but the general tenor of the report is such that we're just trying to figure out a way to really formalize some of the mechanisms that have been a lot less, that could use a little bit more structure over the years. And I've named a couple of the items I think that were most ambiguous, but if one were to look over the 9 pages of the report, I think it would be pretty clear that a lot of these items were improved in terms of the recommendations. We're very open to other suggestions from council and the public as well, and we're very much looking forward to the future agenda item on specifically the Code of Ethics. But in terms of the original intent of this item, it was always about trying to get better communications ultimately with the public through our commissions and to have better quality of discussions for these particular topics that our advisory commissions and committees cover for the city of Cupertino. Vice Mayor Chow?
So yeah, I feel that I hope that the commission position is a venue for our volunteers to not only put their time in specific commission, but also an opportunity for them to grow beyond their assigned commission. Because some Parks and Rec commissioners might want to become planning commissioner one day. Some library commissioners might want to become Parks and Rec commissioners one day. So I would like to encourage them to go beyond their commission to get involved in the community and other commissions. So the moderator recommendation of encouraging participation in 2 community or commission meetings is an encouragement. Of course, many of the commissioners have already attended more than 2, and I would like, if they can be recorded, then that could be encouraged, that we have commissioners that also I think it's our responsibility to inform them about this our community meetings. Many of the commissioners didn't know what opportunities are out there for them to get into the community. So this is also for us to provide them the information on where they can go, what other meetings they can attend to get out there. So I think as part of that is throughout the year, I have already asked the previous interim city manager to include more information about commissioners, photos, bios, so that they are just a name they are just not just a name on our website. They are a point of contact for our community members to reach out to, and they should have that visibility for that. Yeah, and then I think I attended almost every commission meeting, and Darcy has attended many commission meetings also. And we have put out a survey that many commissioners gave us very detailed answers. And we spoke to many commissioners. Based on all this feedback, we come up with these recommendations. That the intention is to support commissioners so that they can use their time effectively to advise the council, and also clarify what's the role of staff liaison, so that they are supporting the commissioner to work on the tasks that the city council would like to see for our city. And as for the code of ethics, last year, the intention, well, I have to say all this came out because there was an intention of merging Library Commission and Public Safety Commission with Parks and Rec Commission out of maybe concern of saving time. But then in the end, it changed into an improvement on communication so that we actually are using we are more effective working with commissioners, which is great. However, as part of the result of that discussion on November 20th, 2018, for some reason, Code of Ethics document was included as a sub-item under improvement of communication with commissioners and council. That came out of nowhere, and there was no staff report on who suggested that, how that's even considered an improvement of communication. But then, which is why we repealed the project, that particular document. However, there are a lot of community feedback that the city probably should still have a specific code of ethics statement. So although the city, Cupertino, has been in existence since 1960s, 50s, and there has never been a code of ethics adopted by the city. But every city council member must have been abide by the code of ethics that's common, and they abide by all the legal standard for code of ethics. So whether we adopt a specific standard or not, it's not important. But we do feel it's important to still adopt that, but we don't want to confuse that with communication with commissions, which by itself is very important. So we would come back and have the city attorney to draft this so that we make sure we capture. It will be capturing all the standards we are already abiding by the current council and all the previous councils. Okay. And also we want to clarify what it means what's the requirement for especially quasi-judicial decision. Because at the time when I read the first Code of Ethics statement, I didn't know the requirement for quasi-judicial decision is very different from making policy decisions. And the Planning Commission will do need to make a distinguish of that, and hopefully that can help educate all the commissioners and city council members going forward. Yeah.
Okay, I have 3 speaker cards here. First is David Fung, followed by Jean Bedord, followed by Kitty Moore. Welcome, Commissioner Fung.
Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm David Fung, a current planning commissioner, and I'm in my 9th year of service on the city commissions. Today, I'd like to address some deficiencies in the subcommittee report. A basic thrust of this report was to increase transparency in commission interactions. So it's a little ironic the names of the subcommittee members were not included in this report. There's also a 12-page summary of responses intended to represent commissioner input, but the full set of 40 commissioner responses, 41, were not included in this package. This flies in the face of the report's own recommendations that say agenda package should be comprehensive and include as much supporting materials as available for transparency. This special meeting was noticed at 10 p.m. last Wednesday evening, and I sent an email to the city manager regarding these issues just a few hours later, commenting on the report's lack of a timeline in history. This makes it impossible for an interested observer to get a clear understanding of the context or objectives of this exercise, the very definition of a lack of transparency. This omission was addressed in a cursory manner in the written communications update just 7 hours ago, but the added timeline still lacks any meaningful specificity. It doesn't include the dates of council meetings where actions were taken. This information itself is incomplete. The gestation of the discussion around commissions started months before July 2018 with a simple question in an April budget study session asking about commission expenditures. Consolidation of the commissions was raised in the July 31st, 2018 study session because the municipal code at that time included sheriff, library, fire, and disaster preparedness in the Parks and Recreation Commission responsibilities. There's a very complete historical record in the November 20th, 2018 staff report, thanks to Ms. Nomura, but you would be hard-pressed to be able to find this without personal involvement in this long-running discussion. And I want to emphasize, really long-running. The full breadth of this commission discussion covers 15 months and 4 city managers. The subcommittee's report has an unmistakable negative bias. There's verbiage like, quote, no written feedback was sought or obtained from the advisory commissions and committees, which reflected just the short 2 to 4 month focus that the last council had on this. This subcommittee has been working on this report for 8 months now, including 5 months since the commissioners were polled for input. I don't have time to address the actual recommendations tonight, but this illustrates a problem around the role of who agendizes items. The chair might like to add an item for the next meeting 2 weeks out, but you can see that generating a meaningful staff report may take months. Again, I remind you, this very incomplete subcommittee report has taken 8 months. This study session was scheduled as a special meeting off of the regular work plan and agenda and had a short time slot where community input is limited. I recommend you take no further action in this study session other than to ask the subcommittee to go back and fix the report and recommendations for proper consideration by you and the public at a future date. Thank you.
Thank you. Next I have Jean Bedord, followed by Kitty Moore, followed
Can
by
I
Jennifer
respond to
Griffin.
that? Okay.
Sure.
So I
Briefly.
think I agree that what's missing here is the subcommittee members. And the initial version here didn't include the timeline. So some timeline was added, but then it wasn't complete. But then what should have been, maybe next time it comes back, there should be a staff report that captured all the history, which is it's not the subcommittee's job to capture everything that has happened till now. Our job is to figure out make recommendation on better communication. So maybe next time the staff report can capture the history. I didn't know there are like 4 years history. I have no idea.
Okay.
So that would be good. Yeah.
Thank you. Jean Bedord, followed by Kitty Moore, followed by Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jean.
Good evening, Mayor Scharf and council members. My name is Jean Bedord and I live in Cupertino. I am a former library commissioner and attend meetings for other commissions. I am here to express my puzzlement over this subcommittee report on commissions. First of all, and you've addressed this, who wrote the report? Who is on the subcommittee? When did they meet? The council has committed to transparency and accountability, but I don't see that demonstrated in this report. Secondly, the methodology is incomplete. Yes, there were responses from 41 commissioners, but not the total number of commissioners to determine response rate. What was the response from each commission? Standard practice for city reports is to provide verbatim responses, not excerpts. Thirdly, there is role confusion between staff, council, and commissioners, particularly when setting agendas. Usually this is a collaborative process, but this report is too prescriptive. It fails to take into account that it takes at least a year on any commission to understand the issues of that particular commission. Fourthly, there was a commitment by the council to develop a bona fide code of ethics for both the council and commissions. That is missing in this report and badly needed given the recent misconduct by the chair of the Planning Commission. Fifthly, the report does not consider major differences in the scope of commissions. For example, the library is governed by the Santa Clara County Library District, not the city. A council member is assigned to represent the city on the library JPA, but there's no provision for that person to report back to the Library Commission. This report needs a lot more work. Thank you.
I still think we should clarify some of the questions. For example, Library Commission by the city is an advisory body to the city council. They don't advise the library or the JPA. So that's a misunderstanding.
So,
And also,
Vice Mayor, you can address this when we bring it back to council. Now I would like to finish the comment cards. Kitty Moore, followed by Jennifer Griffin, followed by Connie Cunningham. Welcome, Kitty.
Good evening, City Council. I actually really appreciate the fact that you're working on this, improving the process. I'd like you to conduct an annual review. I'm just going to quickly go through my notes. I'd like it if you would number the recommendations so that it will aid in us commenting. We need a list of various outside meetings that the City Council attends, and not just the community events, which you mentioned, because there could be volunteers who would like to attend other meetings like VTA or MTC, things like that. And then I think it would be great if you would incentivize the commissioners and committee members for attending these meetings, some kind of public recognition at the end of the year, to let them know that they're appreciated for going to some extra events. I have some questions about the cancellation requirement. I know that the chair can cancel a meeting or debate the cancellation of the meeting, but I don't see how the rest of the commission, if a meeting is like for Planning Commission, if we're looking at having a Tuesday meeting and say the chair is trying to get that meeting held, has some particular topics that they want held, and perhaps they're getting some pushback, I don't know how the other commission members would be informed of that going on without violating the Brown Act, especially if you can have two commission members schedule a meeting. That gets confusing to me. Also, you've got a mention about having an annual review in order to change the scope of work of a commission. And I can say right now that the Environmental Review Commission is looking to alter its scope of work. And we're not waiting until next year in order to do that. So I don't know if that's going to be a problem. And the communications with staff liaison paragraph needs some clarification. What would the policy-based statement that the staff liaison supports the commission or committee look like, which would be different from current policy? Is there a current policy? I'm assuming that there is. If the staff liaison provides topical updates on a regular basis, would that be an ongoing agenda item? Is that going to be the staff and commission activities, reports, and future agenda setting item? And we need to be reminded that it's not just the chair who can communicate to the staff liaison. I think sometimes it seems as though there's some gatekeeping going on where the rest of the commission members aren't supposed to talk to staff. It's just the chair. And so I think that should be communicated widely, not just to the Planning Commission, but to the other commissions. If a single commissioner proposes an agenda item during a meeting, does that require a motion, second, and a vote? And if not, why not? Can just one commission member during that staff reports time add that item? And where in the agenda would staff and commission activities, reports, and future agenda setting fall? That question comes up because it looked like you could cancel an agenda item. So.
Okay, yeah, if you want to finish your last
Thank you.
Points, that's okay.
Okay. I recommend against posting the draft minutes. I actually have a story about this.
Okay, no stories.
Okay.
You're over time already.
Okay, so I wouldn't post the draft minutes. Require special meeting is scheduled and have actual approved minutes that the entire commission agrees on. Please add the agenda item number in your agenda packet, just like Palo Alto does, so that when you're fishing through the whole packet, you know what you're looking at. Just put a large font with a number. And please, can the Planning Commission follow Robert's rules? And if I didn't preface this, I am speaking for myself only.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think it was a good point about altering the scope of work in the middle of the year. Actually, for ERC, we're kind of altering it to what was always supposed to be, but has not been. But we need some way, if it's necessary to change the scope of work mid-year, you don't have to wait till the next year to do it. So I'm sure we can include that somehow in there.
Okay, well, that item has to go before the city council as a CMC alteration.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Next, Jennifer Griffin, followed by Connie Cunningham, followed by Robert McCoy. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, City Council. I'm Jennifer Griffin, and we are so lucky to live in a city like Cupertino where we can have free speech discussion from all of our commissions, our city council, our committees. We have a lot of things that are happening federally and in Sacramento where free flow discussion is being either impeded or not heard, and there is no transparency. So I think that free discussion begins at home. It begins in our cities. And that's why local control at the city level is becoming increasingly important. This is the place where the public gets to talk about their issues, and they get to talk about it with the people who represent them on their committees and their commissions. And I cannot begin to stress again that this is the heart of democracy. This is where it began, in town hall meetings in the East and in, I don't know what other types of things in other parts of the country, but I'm beginning to see that slip away. And I am so grateful that Cupertino has public commissions like we do, and committees and city council. So in terms of the code of ethics, I'm glad, maybe we need one down the road. We didn't have one before, but we're not the only place that has one or doesn't have one. But it is a work in progress. You can't just adopt I understand the city staff was up against a timeline, but this type of thing, I feel better that you all have a committee that you're working on to come up with something that works for Cupertino and our place in California and in the United States. I think that it's good that you all are talking about Robert's Rules of Order. I took parliamentary speech at Homestead. I remember, I don't know if we were fresh sophomores or whatever, but it was a lot of fun. And a lot of my classmates that I have stayed in touch with, I remember when they were 15 and 16 trying to go through and follow the parliamentary, which I'm sure you all participated in that. So I will say that I am extremely grateful for everything that we have in Cupertino. I think that it's important to keep committees separate, that we don't have one committee that starts taking over other committees. I don't know what was going on there, but it's each committee to its own, and each committee giving public input and interacting with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we have Connie Cunningham, followed by Bob McCoy. Welcome, Connie.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members, City Manager, and City Attorney. I'm Connie Cunningham, Cupertino resident, and I serve on the Housing Commission. So in the beginning of this round of discussions, I did put in my comments at that time. Only a couple of things kind of stood out for me to make comments on tonight. I'm fairly new to the commission process, and so probably I'm more confused than some of your other more people that have been on them longer. However, I have found them confusing, and I found, in fact, that the reading this it brought out some good things that if they're not already being done, it would be useful to do. I do want to compliment our particular staff liaison, Carrie Huesler. She does a great job. I've never felt like I couldn't talk to her. I always felt like I can, and she's always very good with us. One thing that I had been wondering about is whether there was a way to have a standing agenda item. Perhaps there isn't from what I've heard, but a standing agenda item would be helpful because sometimes we have an agenda item, but you'd like to talk about something that either had happened before, and it seems like it would be nice to be able to bring it back up. And I'm not quite clear about how we should take care of that. But in any case, I do like the idea of more flexibility with the agenda. I also really want to emphasize how much I support having a meeting every month. We meet monthly. Regardless of whether there appears to be an agenda item from our work program or not, because of the oral communications section. Housing is a really big deal, a very hot topic these days, and I think it's important for our residents to know that at 9 o'clock on the Thursday of the month, they can come to the Housing Commission and talk to us. I know it happened to me when I wasn't on the commission. I didn't realize that meetings could be canceled, and I'd have it already on my calendar, and I'd be coming over, and it's like, oh no, they're not meeting today. Oh, that was before I got with the flow of it. Not everybody is really familiar with the flow of how all of our activities work. So anyway, I wanted to say I really strongly want our meetings to happen as they are scheduled. I do believe that a code of ethics is important. I like the fact that you're working on it. I worked in procurement for many, many years. We had a code of ethics. It's something that you discuss regularly, and it's something that it does not hurt to discuss regularly. You can forget, perhaps, the importance of some key points. And we're all people, and it's important that we talk about the ethics of how we're dealing with the constituents as well as each other. And that's it.
I have a question for the speaker, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
So thank you for your comments. They're very constructive. In terms of your first comment with regard to a standing agenda item, are you asking for a mechanism to be able to speak at a subsequent meeting about something that you spoke with the commission at a previous meeting? Is that just a mechanism to try to keep that agenda item open for future agendas, or is there some other request being made in that?
Well, I guess the example that came to mind, and that's why that's really not fully formed. I think it really has to be thought about more. But at our last meeting, we had gotten a copy of our work program, and it had an additional item on it that had not been on it before. But the work program discussion was over as far as that goes, like either last week or last month or the month before, where we all signed off on this as our work program. But when I got a copy of it through the email process, I went, looks like we have something added here. But it wasn't an agenda item, and it's like, well, then you can't talk about that, and it was very frustrating to me. It seemed like, really, I just want to, no, that's it. And so I guess that's the main thing. It was something added to something that was closed, and I wanted to talk about it, but I wasn't sure whether it went under new business, old business.
Got it, okay.
Blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be the minutes of the meeting, or?
Wouldn't be under.
I think just
Maybe. Yeah,
Oh.
okay.
I wanted to
Maybe under
just
the
ask a
Yeah.
clarifying question, but that's a good answer, so
Okay.
I'll reserve some follow-up comments after the speakers. So.
Right,
Okay.
and maybe the city
Thank you.
attorney could look into how you would speak on a previous meeting's agenda item when it's not on the current agenda, and still not be doing anything wrong or illegal.
Okay.
All
So
right, thank you,
something I
Connie.
wanted to ask earlier, I think it's important for the city attorney to clarify whether this subcommittee is a Brown Act committee. We are ad hoc committee.
That's correct. It's an ad hoc committee that
So
is
it
subject to the
doesn't
Brown Act.
subject to Brown Act.
That's right.
Which is why we did not, but then like Legislative Review Committee, it's a standing committee which is subject to Brown Act.
Okay, the last card, Robert McCoy. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. My name is Robert McCoy. I'm the current chair of the Public Safety Commission. I've been a commissioner going on almost 8 years now. I'll be terming out completely at the end of this year. And I think the first thing, I would second what Commissioner Moore said about recognition. We have people that are working around their family's time at home to do work on behalf of the city and the community. And I think a little bit of recognition would go really far, and you get a lot more results that way. Second, I think there needs to be a clearly defined role and responsibility of what a commission can and cannot do. Currently, right now, it's very vague. If we have an idea and we bring it up, then we got to wait for city staff to answer yes or no. That might take a whole meeting in between, so a month to get an answer to a question. Third, I think that posting draft minutes is not really a great idea because they can be changed before the approval of the actual minutes. And one thing that concerns me about a live meeting being videotaped is the banter that could go on throughout a meeting between commissioners that the public might not appreciate, thinking that it's on their time. So jokes might occur. They're all in good manner, but it might make people upset. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Just two speakers asked a question about draft minutes. We consider that because a feedback was some commissions, they don't meet every month. They meet every 3 months. Then the public cannot find out what have been even decided in that commission. So there was, we were recommending maybe they could post a draft minute first so that public can at least know what went on in a previous meeting. But yeah, I understand that the commission might not approve the draft minute. But it's like we post draft minutes now in this council agenda to a previous one. People might disagree. A lot of times we don't approve that minute, we postpone. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The Water Commission, Library Commission, they meet quarterly, and you have no idea what happened. The public has no idea what happened because the minutes aren't published until the meeting 3 months later when they're approved. And so, yeah, it's a trade-off. Sometimes draft minutes may be a good idea, but there's definitely a risk in doing that.
Well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, you're essentially saying move up the time where the draft minutes would be generated to, instead of, say, a set number of days before the next meeting, a set number of days after the meeting in which the draft minutes are capturing.
Yeah,
So you're not asking for a difference in the content of what those draft minutes would be. You're just asking for them to come up earlier. So if for some reason a quarterly meeting got canceled, you wouldn't actually see the draft minutes until approximately half a year later. But if you were to change that rule and say, okay, give us draft minutes 3 weeks after the meeting, then the public would have the benefit of those draft minutes and be able to understand what, at least from a draft perspective, what happened. So I would like to propose that we take the feedback and have a follow-up round and consolidate some of these recommendations. I really appreciate the comment with regard to the authorship, and I do want to clarify with regard to what happened. Generally speaking, there are no subcommittees of the council that generate reports. It's just that for this particular topic, we felt it was so close to public engagement, and with regard to what had happened previously, it was a little bit off the rails, vis-a-vis what we were requesting. And so we formed a subcommittee to take that report, and we worked very cohesively with the staff. However, there was no template for a subcommittee report from the council, and so the request was, well, put this onto letterhead. We didn't get to that point where someone said, hey, let's put authors in here. The subcommittee should have said it, staff probably should have pointed that out, but it wasn't done in an effort to try to be non-transparent. And so what I would like to request is that when we publish the materials after the council, that we specifically say that this staff, this subcommittee was comprised of Vice Mayor Chow and myself, and the authorship of the subcommittee report was, what was the two of us, and that it was reviewed by the city manager, because it was reviewed by the city manager, and I believe the city attorney.
And then the
reviewed
city
as well.
staff who helped with Katie, right?
That's right.
Katie
That's
helped
right.
us to summarize a lot of things.
Right. So and I also want to thank one of our former mayors and council members, Barbara Rogers, for helping us out for a couple of the sessions that we met on. But I think that we've gotten a lot of really great feedback from our commissions and the public. There are a couple of items such as, do we want draft minutes? What's going to be the scope of particular committees or commissions. On that topic, I would say that you would have to look at what empowered the committee or commission in the first place. Most of our commissions, if not all of them, I think, are codified by the municipal code. And so if you're going to change scope in a manner that went outside of the code, it would require a code change. I think a committee is more directly empowered by council decision. Although, I don't know, I think that was probably a question best left for the city attorney to research and to let us know how we would best, in the middle of a year, potentially change the scope of a committee or a commission's work. And then with regard to some of the questions with such as a standing agenda item, if there's a question as to what had been discussed previously or what would like to be discussed subsequently, that's precisely why we're recommending that we have an item at the end of each of these committee and commission meetings with regard to what people would like to talk about in the future. And so that would be a good opportunity to talk about, to go back and say, remember when we were talking about our work plan, maybe I have a process issue, maybe I have a specific topic that I'd like to talk about. Can we agendize this for a future meeting? And so we're not saying that these recommendations are set in stone, of course, but with the limitation of time and our regular meeting starting in about 10 minutes, I would recommend that we go back, consolidate some of these suggestions, and then have another round. And it might even coincide with when the city manager and the city attorney brings back their recommended code of ethics. And so, I think it's been much appreciated from the public and from our commissions and committee members, their participation. There was also no desire to try to gloss over any of these feedback points. I believe it was 91 pages of feedback. And so when we were interfacing with our staff liaison, Katie Namura, we essentially asked ourselves, do we want to make this more readable, or do we want to not do that work of summarizing it and then just giving a 91-page PDF? That is a public document. And so if anyone wants to take a look at it, certainly that is available. But given the feedback, I would say, we can go ahead and provide that in the post-meeting materials, as well as an addendum to the next time we put this on the agenda. So, I see this as a multi-step process.
Yeah, I did get feedback from some commissioners. They would rather not post it.
That's right.
But
and we were also concerned about people's
document
right.
Also,
right.
yeah.
We were concerned about that particular feedback from some of our commissioners stating that, well, we would like to make sure that we don't necessarily have attribution for our own comments, and so I think we could probably work that out with regard to particular concerns, or maybe removing the names from the people who made those particular comments.
And I'd like to add one thing, that different commissioners, even within the same commission, they have different experiences, specifically with how accessible the staff liaison is. Some commissioners feel the staff liaison is very accessible. Some feel they don't even know when they can talk to them. So that we should try to make sure there is a mutual understanding of what sort of things commissioners could expect from the staff, and the staff can expect from commissioners, right. So that we still should. And also, I think the staff liaison also is not sure of their role in a commission meeting, that we can further clarify. Yeah.
Right. Okay, John, do you have anything?
Yes. So, first is kind of a question. The interaction to get all the input for your report, did you actually get that at the commission meetings? Did you meet with them offline, personally? Where?
So
91 pages.
Right, well, 91 pages. Those, the interim city manager at the time, Tim Borden, went to each of the commission and committee meetings and presented those 12 questions and asked for written feedback from the members of each of the commissions and committees.
So then, now that I kind of understand that, and if what I'm understanding from the residents here tonight, for the most part, they weren't part of the process, or there wasn't an opportunity, and correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't an opportunity for them to bring their concerns, questions to the process.
Well, this is essentially the
Now is
opportunity.
their opportunity to comment on what they would like to see.
Yeah, and I liked what Councilman Paul said, you know, another round. Okay, but in the normal instance, this is the final. And
This is study session.
well, it's a study session, but the work's already been done. The time for the input is when the work is being done. When residents want more transparency, when residents have concerns, and they don't get to bring that to the process, and the process plays out for weeks or months, and then show up here and for the first time, you know, try to give that input, but the horse is already out of the barn. Well, we'll go through another round.
Well, this started last July 30th, right?
Yeah, well, we're
So
kinda-
then was on the agenda November 20th last year, and then was on the agenda February, and then now it's on the agenda again.
Okay.
So there are, now we have something concrete for them to comment on. Because before there was not even something concrete they can comment on. Now there is something concrete, they can comment if they like it, if things what doesn't work, now they can comment on.
Okay, so if I stick with the first part, and then I'll come to that one, just, I think we should try to be soliciting input all along the process. I realize we're very busy. I mean, tonight's meeting will probably go well past midnight. So we're all very, very busy, trying to get things moving through, but I'd really like to not see that happen at the expense of the community's opportunity to give the input. Okay, so now on to the second part where you say, here's the opportunity for the residents to put their input. So good. Now residents have spoken. They've raised their questions. They've said they've got concerns. I feel each and every one of those should be listed and subject to an answer as part of the process. I mean, they've taken the time to come here, raise their concerns. One that we'd all kind of think is important, transparency. An answer to that, I think, is very important. Is this process really addressing the transparency? How will all the items under that be available, you know, things of that nature. And so I would be really advocating that maybe we do a little bit less in terms of the sheer number of things that we tackle, but we do a better job at the ones that we do, specifically in regard to getting resident input and making sure that they feel that they had an opportunity and to speak before the horse got out of the barn, meaning tonight, here it is, those types of questions, you know, could have been brought up here as part of the staff report. Here are the key questions. We won't go through them all, but they all got looked at. There's answers. Maybe we hit the heavy hitters like transparency. And so again, I'm just trying to say that I think that needs to be pretty high on our list, that resident engagement, getting the input from the residents, and if it means we have to tackle fewer items to do a better job with the items that we are doing, that I would say that would be where I'd be focused myself.
Okay, Rod, do you have anything?
No, I appreciate the subcommittee's work and take to heart the comments that we've received from the public on this. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate all the written comments. And in response to John, you know, they went out to all the commissions, which are all residents almost. I think maybe a couple of commissions have non-residents when it's allowed. So, I mean, I think you have to first have something to comment on. You can't really have 1,000 people writing a report. It would just never get done. So I kind of do like this format. This is not the final thing. This is just a study session, and really appreciate the written feedback from Commissioner Moore, and I got a letter from Commissioner Sheeran, all detailed points, and I think they all should be addressed, including the ones raised orally here, and I'm sure that the subcommittee can do that.
And since we do have about another minute, there was one question raised by Commissioner Sheeran of the Bike Ped Committee, of the Bike Ped Commission, with regard to what constitutes a commission or committee with decisional authority. And I'd like to have the city attorney speak to that particular point.
Yeah, and that comment was referring to a part of the report that referenced quasi-judicial approval processes and the need for special attention to due process procedures for those approvals. So within our commissions, we have the Planning Commission and also the Administrative Hearing Officer, which is listed in the city's web page under committees that are making those types of approvals. And I think any commission or committee that's advising those commissions should also be cognizant of due process concerns as they're making those advice, which would include the Design Review Committee, the Environmental Review Committee, and the Technology Commission to the extent that it's commenting on compliance with franchise agreements.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, so it's 6:43. The regular council meeting will start in a few minutes, so we can take a short break. So we'll end the study session. Okay, let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, can you conduct the roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember Willie? Here. Councilmember Paul?
Here.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Here.
Mayor Scharf?
Here. And hopefully Councilmember Sinks will join us shortly. So our first item under ceremonial matters and presentations, presentation on green stormwater infrastructure in the city's municipal regional permit, requirement to consider future adoption of a long-term green stormwater infrastructure plan. So can we have the staff report and presentation? Director of Public Works, Roger Lee, and congratulations on your promotion.
Yes, thank you very much. Roger Lee, Director of Public Works. I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to many years of service with the City of Cupertino. What this presentation is about is a green stormwater infrastructure plan. Back in April of 2017, Council adopted a work plan. Our municipal regional permit, of which we're with 14 other co-permittees, it requires that a stormwater green infrastructure plan be adopted by September of this year. And so that item is scheduled to come to council on August the 20th. Jill Bicknell from EOA is a consultant working on this. I've known Ms. Bicknell for over 20 years. I consider her the stormwater expert on this topic, and any stormwater topic for that matter. So with that, I'll hand the presentation over to Ms. Bicknell. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Roger, and good evening, council members, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. As Roger said, I'm going to speak about the city's green stormwater infrastructure plan. I'm with EOA, a consulting firm that's helping the city develop the plan. I also work with the Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program, which is a countywide program in which the city participates and collaborates with the other cities in Santa Clara Valley. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Next slide, please. A green stormwater infrastructure are basically systems that use vegetation and soils and natural processes to capture stormwater, treat it, and help create healthier urban environments. Next slide. Here's a graphic that illustrates the difference between green infrastructure and gray infrastructure, which is the typical set of pipes and pumps and things that you use to drain stormwater away from urban areas. With gray infrastructure, runoff is picking up pollutants that flow across impervious surfaces like roofs, parking lots, and streets. drains it directly into a storm drain, and then it flows directly into creeks in San Francisco Bay without any kind of treatment. With green infrastructure, those runoff flows from those surfaces and is captured by landscape features or pervious pavement that reduce the amount of runoff, reduce the amount of pollutants, and provide cleaner water flowing into storm drains and creeks. Next slide. So your green infrastructure plan is going to be focused on how we can incorporate these facilities into public spaces, public parcels, and public rights-of-way in ways that will help divert the runoff to vegetated areas, pervious pavements, specifically engineered facilities called biotreatment or infiltration facilities, and also rainwater collection systems. And these facilities are similar to the types of facilities that the city's been requiring private developers to include on projects since 2011 per the city's stormwater permit. So now we're just going to be putting these kinds of features in the public right-of-way. Next slide. So the next few slides are examples of different types of green stormwater infrastructure. The first type is called bioretention areas, which are basically depressed landscaped areas that collect runoff running off of surfaces through cuts in the curb, typically. The features on the bottom of the slide are similar, except that they're encased in concrete boxes. They can be put right next to buildings and collect runoff from roof surfaces, and they're called flow-through planters. Next slide. We can also put green infrastructure on roofs in garden areas or extensively across the entire roof to capture water falling on the roof. We can incorporate green stormwater infrastructure into tree installations, street trees that may be connected by an underground trench that's filled with special soil and allows the trees to extend their roots and use some of the stormwater that's collected from neighboring streets. Next slide. Pervious pavements also help us collect and infiltrate stormwater into the native soil. They can either be interlocking concrete pavers, pervious concrete, pervious asphalt, and turf block and other kinds of pavement that allows the water to flow through it. Rainwater harvesting is a way of collecting stormwater in either cisterns above ground or underground or in rain barrels to then store it and use it for a non-potable use such as irrigation or toilet flushing within a building. Next slide. So GSI, or Green Stormwater Infrastructure features, have multiple benefits. They're not only reducing flows and pollutants, as we are required to by the city's stormwater permit, but they also help reduce local flooding, provide more urban greening. They can be integrated into facilities that provide for pedestrian and bike safety, such as shown in this picture with you have a curb extension that helps decrease the distance across the street for the pedestrian, and that creates a pocket where we can put landscaping that collects runoff from the street. They also help with climate resiliency in terms of reducing heat island effect and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they provide increased wildlife habitat. Next slide. So briefly on the regulatory side, many of you know that stormwater discharges from the city are regulated by the Regional Water Quality Control Board for the San Francisco Bay region, and the city is covered by a permit that includes 76 other Bay Area permittees, cities, counties, and flood control and water districts. And Cupertino and 14 other agencies within Santa Clara Valley participate in the urban runoff program that I referred to earlier. And that program is helping you achieve compliance with various trainings and resources and guidance that can make it more cost-effective to pool resources and help the member agencies. So our permit, which is called the MRP, mandates that each permittee prepare a green stormwater infrastructure plan and submit it to the Regional Water Board by September, as Roger mentioned. And so you will be seeing the Cupertino GSI plan on August 20th. It will be brought to you for your approval. Next slide. In terms of fiscal impact, there are certain things required in the GSI plan, which we're making sure that it does contain, and that is to prioritize and map potential projects and prioritize areas to be considered for green infrastructure implementation during the 2020 to 2040 timeframe. We are also required to incorporate GSI concepts and related municipal plans, look at funding options, and look at opportunities that might come up in capital projects. We also have to submit reports to the Water Board annually that talk about how you're implementing your plan and tracking and reporting your progress. There are currently no specific requirements for building a certain number of projects during that 20-year period. We don't know what might be in our next permit. This current permit goes through the end of December 2020, and we're currently working with the Water Board to negotiate the next 5-year permit. That might contain more strict requirements for a number of projects or a certain amount of area treated. But to date, there's no specific requirement, but there is a requirement to annually evaluate your capital improvement project list and look for opportunities to integrate green stormwater infrastructure. So I mentioned that we need to look at related municipal plans to make sure that they're supportive of the GSI plan. And the city has already completed that process. And the general plan, climate action plan, and the Parks Master Plan that's under development all contain language about green stormwater infrastructure that supports the implementation of that plan. Other plans, as they come up for revision and renewal, will be evaluated to see if additional language would be inserted into them. So I mentioned having to look at your capital improvement project list. This is a exercise that has to be completed at least annually, and the earlier the better, so that we can incorporate these features into design and look for opportunities for funding. These lists and the results of that review have to be reported to the Water Board, and there's been regional guidance for how to conduct that review, and the city has been following that regional guidance and reporting annually on GSI opportunities for the last 3 years. And another annual report is coming up in September 2019. So I wanted to briefly show you some examples of GSI opportunities that you might see in a capital project. This is probably the most famous one in our area. It was Hacienda Avenue in Campbell. You might be familiar with that street. It used to be very wide right-of-way, failing pavement, speeding traffic, and they really need to do something to make that more pedestrian and bike-friendly and just safer for the community. So if you go to the next slide, you can see how that street was transformed with complete street elements as well as green street elements. If you look along each side of the street, outside of the parking area, there are green areas that are bioretention areas that collect water. That sheet flows off of the street and goes into those areas for collection and treatment. And it was a very successful project. Next slide. Here's another close-up of one of the facilities on Hacienda Avenue. You can use all different kinds of vegetation. They chose to use a native Nomo fescue, but you can also use low-growing ground covers and bushes or whatever suits that location. And you can see they've also tied it into the tree well next to the feature, which collects some of the stormwater as well. So more locally, an opportunity that came up was a parking lot at Blackberry Farm, which needed to be renovated. And that was transformed from this view that was a mostly impervious surface to the next slide, where it was constructed with turf block and pervious pavement and trees to transform that parking lot. And this was a project done in advance of the requirements imposed by the city's permit. Here's another example of a pervious concrete application along the Stevens Creek Trail, which connects Blackberry Farm to other areas within the city, and it's a very nice feature, as well as allowing stormwater to filter through that surface. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions or take some input from you that we might be able to incorporate into the plan, which is being finalized now for your adoption in August.
Yes, the question I have when you say funding options, is there money available for this from outside our city's own general fund, or how do we need to pay for this ourselves?
Well, that part of the plan does look at options outside of your general plan. Your general fund. There are grant opportunities from state bond-funded grants, as well as some transportation grants. There are ways to leverage private development by looking at how these features can be maybe incorporated along their frontage or as part of conditions of approval or development approvals. There are opportunities to potentially partner with other jurisdictions. There are ways to increase fees or look at development impact fees. There are a number of options that city staff are reviewing right now, just at a high level, to kind of identify things that will be investigated further in the future. In the plan, you do not have to commit to particular types of funding. In fact, you often would want to combine a number of different sources in a project.
All right, thank you. I got one speaker card just now, so I'll let this person go. Welcome, Rhoda Fry.
Hi, so do I stand next to you? Or? All right. Hi, I'm Rhoda. I saw the card about the comment about Blackberry Farm, and it was a neat plan. However, trees that needed more water wound up being planted, and they all died, and they were all removed. And the parking lot is actually quite a disaster. It was a good idea, but in application it didn't work. And one of the things I'm concerned about is I keep on seeing these new city projects come along without fixing our old infrastructure. You know, we look at Memorial Park, or, you know, as I said, the failed parking lot at Blackberry Farm, and I had to get up when that was mentioned because all of those, 30 some odd trees are no longer there, and the parking spots are a mess. So it should have been really nice, but it didn't work out, and I hope we can fix it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rhoda. Yeah, you can ask.
Can the staff comment on that parking lot situation?
Yeah, Rhoda is correct. The trees that were used there weren't the right tree for the right place. So they do need to be replaced. In terms of but it still is a bioretention area that I do believe has worked well. It's just the trees weren't the right trees, the right place. As far as the concrete and the pervious pavement, I mean, that's performed well. It needs a little bit additional maintenance just to vacuum out the porous surfaces that tend to collect sediment over time, but that's standard. But Rhoda is correct on the trees.
So how did we decide which trees to plant? How come we didn't expect this?
Well, that was, I imagine it was, the trees that were selected were native to the river area and required a lot of water, as she said. And it's just when they became isolated within the parking lot, that's where the problem had. So just a different variety of tree needs to be planted there.
Okay. Yeah. So do we have all these already in our municipal code or general plan so that the next project comes along, they will be required to already install green stormwater features?
Yeah, it is considered with each project now as an opportunity.
So it's part of our municipal code for
I don't know if I'd say
any
it's the
project,
municipal code. I mean, this GSI adoption will formalize that, but as a practice, we've been doing it for several years. So even if you look outside, just to the south of this building and the bioretention in the parking lot, we've been doing it.
But because projects could be streamlined nowadays, right?
Yeah.
So we need to codify all this. So we don't have it codified yet. Maybe we should.
And the adoption of this plan will go throughout, the building and planning and all the projects that are being reviewed. Yes.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. You had mentioned that in our capital improvement projects, the annual review, this would be a part of that. Has the Planning Commission considered this plan as part of its commentary and input to us for this item tonight? And I have the same question with regard to the Sustainability Commission, because it seems like a pretty logical topic for them as well.
I don't believe it has yet. That's an outstanding suggestion. We can certainly do that.
Okay, great. I know that the Sustainability Commission meets later this week, and so it's probably too late to put an item on their agenda with regard to this if it's not already. But maybe in August. You had mentioned in your staff report that August 20th is when this is coming back.
Right. Yes. So yeah, we would do it. Yeah, I think it'd be a very good thing to take to both of those commissions.
Okay, great. The other question I had was that we've recently made some pretty significant investments in our medians, especially along Deanza Boulevard. Was there a consultation with regard to this plan when some of that median design was being considered?
Yeah, there's very limited opportunity with those particular medians. I don't think it would be practical just the way the street slope away from the medians now. It would really have required us to redo the entire width of the street.
I see. So I guess maybe there's a precursor question to that, because you did show in your presentation some areas along the roads, along the sides and in the parking lot. And it was very unfortunate with regard to the trees. It kind of reminds me of the sprinkler system that we had out here that didn't quite work out. It was like smart sprinklers, and we ended up having to go into some dispute. But kind of on that tangent as well, I mean, it's good to try, I think, for these types of, items, and there are always going to be, I think, bugs to be worked out. But kind of unfortunate that the trees died and we didn't choose the right ones. But I will also point out that Blackberry Farm, I think, reopened in 2009, which unfortunately also tended to coincide with the 5-year drought beginning at that point. And so maybe that had something to do with it. But certainly, look in the future as to what kind of vegetation we can be putting in that is a little bit more responsive to the local, ecological needs. Was there a question in there? Oh, yeah. So with regard to the medians, is that something that doesn't really get considered as much in these types of plans, or is that also an area that can be considered?
Well, like Roger mentioned, most streets are crowned to drain away from the middle and out to the sides.
Right, as opposed to a swale.
So the median is typically at the high point. If you have a new street and you have the opportunity to grade it differently, you can grade it to flow toward a median. But it's more common to see stormwater planter areas kind of parallel to the sidewalk in park strips or along the outsides of the roads, like I showed in Hacienda.
So not typical right now, but they could potentially think about it in the future, I guess, is the general idea. All right, thank you.
So the comment/question I would have, so I really like the benefits that we get from that, but also the appearance. I mean, so it sounds good. And so then kind of the question that would come out of that would be that not to try and push something on somebody yet, but tonight we'll be talking about the Cupertino Village Hotel. So they're going to be removing the existing buildings, putting in, all new tarmac and landscaping. Have they been talked to about these GSI type things? I mean, here's a perfect opportunity. So that's the question. Are they aware of this? Is this part of their plan?
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Chad Mosley, city engineer. With respect to GSI around the hotel, the hotel fronts onto Wolf Road, which is a main thoroughfare. We're already kind of maxed out with respect to widths and the number of cars that go through there. So there's not really much opportunity along Wolf to bulb out. With respect to installing GSI within the park strip, we have a lot of utilities in that area as well as existing trees. We don't necessarily want to be conflicting with tree roots. So Wolf Road is not really an option. We are doing some additional landscaping along Prune Ridge side, which will help out there. But the hotel in and of itself is subject to C3 guidelines, which are basically the same types of facilities, but on private property. So GSI is kind of C3 for the right-of-way, and this project is subject to stormwater requirements on site.
Does that include the porous parking area? I mean, it seems like that's a pretty large part. Does that include that? Or?
So much of the hotel is on a podium, which means you've got parking underneath. You don't really want water going through that concrete and flooding the parking garage. So with respect to the paved areas, there's not really much opportunity there for this site.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
So a question regarding, I guess, we are paving the parking lot for McLellan Ranch parking lot. So that one we are using permeable pavement?
Yes, that was pervious concrete.
Does that landscaping there follow the GSI standard?
No, it would. If you looked at how the adjacent areas are graded around the parking, how it flows, that's exactly what it's doing.
Great. And so as I understand, permeable pavement needs maintenance. It gets clogged up. So I'm wondering how, because I've seen parking lot that has like grid, like grid, concrete grid. So it's actually just, you even might have small grass growing in between the grid. So it's green and it's naturally permeable. Have we considered those? Do you know what kind?
Yeah, we have considered that in the past, and in areas that receive a lot of car traffic, the grass just tends to die, and we end up with basically what looks like a brick pavered parking lot. We found that porous concrete or porous asphalt actually works fairly well and is relatively cost efficient, because with respect to pavers, you have to actually lay those by hand, whereas with concrete, you can pour it out or lay it out.
I guess the kind that I mentioned, that grass, it's not, the intention was not for the grass to be maintained. The intention was in between the grid, it's a natural just rock. And then the water just falls through, but then the grid pavement is so that it will be easier, smoother for the car to drive through. So if the grass doesn't grow, that's fine.
I think you get the most permeability from the porous concrete over the types of systems you're talking about. So there's just more permeability with the porous concrete. It does require a vacuum sweeper to go through and get those particulates out.
So the vacuum sweeper is not too costly?
Well, in fact, that's what we spec out to do our city streets. So the same street sweeper could go in there and do that maintenance.
How long this kind of permeable pavement would last until we have to replace it, because just vacuuming doesn't even clean up the debris?
I'm not aware that it would have an end of life. It just needs to be maintained.
Okay, great.
Okay. Ron, anything? No. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, finish up. We're over time on this item.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, do you have more?
I was just going to say that with respect to the lifetime of the permeable concrete, the permeability of it is so high that even if it gets clogged a little bit, it's still draining really well. And it drains faster than the native soil, basically. So these types of systems, last as long as traditional pavement.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to the next study session. study session on small cell facilities within the public right-of-way. So we're ready.
Yes, good evening again. Small cell facilities. The purpose of this presentation is a couple-fold. Of course, we want to educate our residents and the council on small cells. And it also has a direct impact on, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh, okay, maybe that would help. We've been working with cellular providers for quite a while. Chad has, and there's 5 in the city that are actively pursuing the small cell technology. Two of which have several open applications in with the city to proceed with small cell towers now, and there is a clock in which we are to permit these. Chad will be going over the different restrictions that we have from the FCC and how a lot of the things that we do are restricted in regards to cell towers. But there are some things that we do have some control over, and one of which is to try to make these things as unobtrusive as we possibly can. So with that, I'll introduce Chad Mosley.
Hello again. I'm here this evening to provide a brief synopsis on the city's small cell wireless program and what the city can and can't do with respect to these facilities. For clarity's sake, this is not a discussion about macro cell towers like the application the city received for the sports center. Though with that application, the applicant is currently working with De Anza College to see if there's an opportunity to place the facility on the college property. Small cells are wireless antenna characterized by their smaller size, lower power output, and smaller coverage area relative to a standard macro cell tower. As an example, a macro cell tower has a power output between 20 and 40 watts, whereas a small cell antenna has a considerably lower power output that ranges between 1 and 5 watts. For this discussion, we're talking about small cells that are located on city-owned streetlights. Further, it should be noted that utility companies have been provided the right by the California Public Utilities Commission to utilize the public right-of-way in order to provide utility services. Wireless providers fall within the purview of these rights. What the city has done with permitting the use of city-owned streetlights for these facilities is to work toward limiting the proliferation of new poles that serve these facilities. The available radio frequency spectrum that is licensed to providers for cellular use is extremely limited and expensive, and given that cellular usage by the public has increased exponentially in the last 20 years, wireless providers have needed to find ways to overcome this limitation. Small cell antenna act as individual nodes for the spectrum and thus allow for the reuse of these frequencies at different locations in a geographic area, increasing a cellular network's capacity, coverage, and quality. Small cells have also been presented as the facilities that will enable 5G to operate efficiently. Federal laws and regulations govern the permitting and placement of cellular facilities within including small cells. Many of these rules have been enacted due to local and state jurisdictions denying applications when they are submitted in response to public opposition of cellular equipment. These rules have been established in much the same vein as many of the recent housing laws that are being enacted at the state level that aim to increase housing production at the local level. A few of these federal rules include that under federal law, a city cannot deny a wireless permit application based on concerns over the health effects of radio frequency emissions as long as the facility operates within FCC radio frequency limits. Local governments are also prevented from establishing regulations for wireless equipment that have the effect of prohibiting such facilities. This includes creating rules or guidelines that make installation of a facility in a certain geographic area impossible. Additionally, cities cannot deny permits based on the adequacies or inadequacies of existing coverage in an area. Cities are also required to review and make a determination on small cell applications in a relatively short amount of time, 60 to 90 days, depending on the type of application. Staff has established a process that meets the enacted time limits and provides for a safety assessment of a particular location, review of preliminary drawings, notification of nearby residents, and time to review final construction drawings. This process is relatively efficient but leaves little room for additional time or processing. In the past, staff has received community concerns regarding the health effects of these facilities. As was discussed in the last slide, the city cannot deny an application based on these concerns, and additionally, we cannot deny an application based on the perception that existing coverage is adequate. Staff has also received requests for a longer notification period. The current policy provides for a 14-day notification period. In truth, staff accepts all input from residents even after the notification period has ended. The 14-day timeline was established to help keep the city compliant with the federally required shot clocks. Additional concerns that were raised to staff were regarding how these facilities would affect property values. Staff has seen no report suggesting that wireless facilities affect values of nearby properties. However, a study was prepared by Joint Venture Silicon Valley in collaboration with the Silicon Valley Association of Realtors and the Santa Clara Realtors Association, which indicates that the distance to a wireless facility has no apparent impact on the value or sale price of homes. Staff is unaware of any other studies that have evaluated this correlation. The city has set clear and reasonable guidelines for wireless providers to follow for small cell facilities. Each proposed location is reviewed and nearby residents are notified. A post-construction testing policy has been established that ensures facilities are compliant with the FCC radio frequency limits. Additionally, we've provided an opportunity for nearby residents to request that testing be done within and around their residence if desired. We've established a design for small cells that is unobtrusive and will permit a homogeneous and consistent look throughout the city, ensuring that facilities do not look different from location to location or between different providers. Additionally, we have worked to establish good working relationships with the wireless carriers to provide Cupertino with an opportunity to have access to a world-class wireless experience. We are home to the iPhone, by the way. Additionally, these relationships have helped us to steer away from facilities that look like these, which are basically small cells on utility poles. To date, I've not seen an acceptable or discrete design for one of these, though the one in the middle is about as unobtrusive as they get. It still looks like a college refrigerator strapped to the side of a utility pole. Instead, we have facilitated a design that is a bit less obtrusive. And here are photos of actual small cells that have already been installed in Cupertino. Staff is here to answer any questions. Additionally, we have representatives from both Verizon and AT&T here in attendance this evening if you have any questions for them.
Okay, thank you. First, I have 2 speaker cards. If anyone else wants to speak on this, please fill out a card. First speaker is Karen and Henry Chang, followed by Nori. Welcome, Karen and Harry.
Good evening. My name is Karen Chang. I'm here today with my husband, Henry Chang, to talk about Verizon's cell site that is proposed at Jollyman Park. My brother David died of a heart attack on Monday, July 8th. I'm busy working on his interment and funeral. I took time to come and attend this meeting because I feel strongly about this issue. On Sunday, July 7th, we attended the city walk at Jollyman Park. We met the city manager, Deborah Fang, and council member John Willey. We showed them the proposed lamp post at the corner of Dumas Drive and Defoe. The proposed cell site would be about 40 feet from our property and 68 feet from our front door. We showed Deborah an alternate site location on the overpass of Stelling Road. It's very close to Jollyman Park, yet far enough away from residential homes. The existing lamp post, number 30412, overlooks Highway 85. We realize that health cannot be used as an issue to stop wireless companies from installing cell towers or cell sites. Studies show RF radiation does have ill effects on the human body, especially to children. I have 4 small grandchildren that we babysit, ranging from 20 months old to 7 years old. Years from now, I don't want to tell them that they got cancer because they were at Grandma and Grandpa's house. I noticed that there's a sign on the front of this building that says, "No smoking within 20 feet of the building." Today, everyone realizes that smoking causes lung cancer, mouth cancer, and throat cancer. I remember 50 years ago when cigarette companies told us that smoking was not bad for our health. Everyone knew it was probably bad for you, but people continued to smoke. It took decades for our government to realize that smoking is bad for your health. The same thing is going to happen with cell sites and cell towers. Many thousands of people are going to get sick and die from the RF radiation before the government steps in. The big difference with cigarettes and cell sites is that individuals choose to smoke, where we aren't given the choice. Wireless companies look at a map and place cell sites wherever they see fit. I have a few questions for the City Council members. What is the FCC's radiation safety limit for constant 24-hour-a-day exposure? Does the City Council ask Verizon to consider an alternate location for the cell site? Does Verizon need a new permit to upgrade from 4G to 5G? Will Verizon notify residents before they get upgraded to 5G? I read the City Council staff report. It states that Verizon has installed 12 small installations on commercial areas along De Anza and Stevens Creek. Is Jollyman Cell Site one of the first residential facilities to come into Cupertino? Are we the guinea pigs? I hope the City Council can talk Verizon into choosing an alternate site. Thank you for your time.
Great. Can you give that list to our staff? So, I mean, I don't think they're going to answer all of them right now, but they can address those. Next, we have Nori, followed by Radha Sharma, followed by Eric Swanson. Welcome, Nori.
Yes. I'm still waiting for the good news from city about the De Anza College decision for the AT&T wireless antenna in their campus. But in meantime, I read a small cell facility report from city engineer for the council meeting. The city may not deny the permit application based on concern over health effect or RF emission, as long as those emissions meet FCC emission standards. So I read FCC website as well, but what is FCC emission standard? Are there any specific measurement number? Does the city measure the emission and verify from each antenna tower and publish the data for us to look at it? The measurement should be done by third-party companies for fairness, not wireless carrier, so that we are less concerned. And when wireless carrier change 4G to 5G, do they inform city and new application for the permit, or just they say upgrade without notice? When I Google searched wireless facility impact on property value, there are many negative reports and articles from many researchers, except Realtor website on articles on joint venture that was studied by realtors. According to Environmental Health Trust and scientists for the wire technology, research indicates that over 90% of home buyers and renters are less interested in properties near the cell tower and would pay less cost than the property. And the price drop up to 20% is found in multiple surveys and published articles. I also read articles from joint venture from city engineer. This study was done 2012, 7 years ago. There was no small cell tower at that time, and there is a few large wireless antenna towers, but there were not too many wireless antenna towers at that time. Most house buyers might not notice the antenna tower when they purchase if 0.25 miles away from the house. Also, realtor might not disclose the location. On the total list price on here, this is a little bit confused of the number. That less than 1.25 is much less price, total price than the more than 0.25 miles away. And if you are a home buyer, would you like to purchase the home where no antenna tower nearby, or a home antenna tower nearby or with less price? Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Radha Sharma, followed by Eric Swanson, followed by Fariba. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Radha Sharma, and I am the Senior Real Estate Manager for Verizon Wireless. As you are well aware, Cupertino is the home for many tech companies and the heart of Silicon Valley. Since the advent of the smartphone, we have seen an exponential demand on our network for both coverage and capacity issues. Generally, the average household has about 13 connected devices at this time, and about 57% of the American population does not have a landline anymore. So with small cell technology, it's allowing us to provide this capacity need to our customers, especially within the city of Cupertino. And over the last 2 to 3 years, we have had a good working relationship with city staff on partnering on these small cell applications and being able to identify the least intrusive means to the city while being able to provide better service to Verizon customers. And we hope to continue that partnership with the city. And as Chad had referred to in his presentation, we had originally started on utility poles within the city, and with partnership of the city and at the request of the city, we have preferred city streetlight locations due to the aesthetics. And therefore, this is the application that we have in front of you for the Jollyman Park neighborhood, which prefers the streetlight over the utility pole, or prefers us putting our own pole within the right of way. And we have looked at approximately 6 to 7 different locations and identified this one as the least intrusive one that complies with our current master license agreement with the city. With that, I would like to thank you guys for your continued partnership with Verizon, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And I also do have a few of my colleagues here from Verizon as well, if you have any additional questions for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John, did you have a question?
Well, the quick one, since we have this person up there. So you said this is the least of the intrusive. I'd sure like to see the pictures of the other ones.
Sure. Would you like to right now?
I'll leave it to the mayor.
Sure, if you have them now, let's do it while we're here.
Do Joanna, do you mind coming up here? Oh, here we go. Oh, there we go. Yeah. All right. Good evening, council members. My name is Joanna Wang. I am with Modus, an authorized representative of Verizon Wireless. We are a site development services firm specializing in small cell solutions, and we assisted Verizon Wireless with this application. As part of the site selection process, Modus looks to identify the least intrusive means to meet Verizon's service objective and takes into account a variety of factors when proposing a solution. These factors include, but are not limited to, topography of the area, any near-field obstructions that might impede the signal, a pole's location within the right-of-way, proximity to other nodes and sites within the network, any circuit loading issues, potential view obstruction from residences, and ADA concerns, to name a few. Here, the service objective is to improve the coverage and capacity to the residential neighborhood northeast of Jollyman Park. And in selecting the subject pole, Modus evaluated 11 different alternatives, each of which were ruled out for a variety of reasons. So as you can see on the aerial map I have in front of you here, I've marked the locations of each streetlight pole and the reasons each was eliminated. Alternative candidates 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 had poles located in residential landscaping. Alternative 2 had extensive tree abatement that would have been required. And alternatives 8,
9, 10, and 11 are closer to residences and determined to be more intrusive than the subject pole. Based on the criteria I noted earlier and the analysis we completed of this area, Modus determined that the subject pole located here is the least intrusive means and solution to service the network. Available if you have any questions regarding this analysis.
Okay, well, you mentioned one of them would require tree removal, but other than that, was there an issue?
Tree abatement, yeah,
Tree
there's
abatement.
extensive tree abatement. The pole is located
Near another node. Okay.
yeah, extensively. I mean, the tree grows around the entire street light, but also it is located near another proposed node.
Okay.
I have a question for the speaker.
Go.
Yes.
Yeah. So my understanding is that this device puts out a lot more power than any cell tower, whether it's a small cell or a large cell. That is, not more power is transmitted, but more power is received by me or people around me. Can you talk to that difference in power levels that the human body incurs from carrying one of these around? Or are we going to have a follow-on speaker?
So Professor Eric Swanson, it was actually put in a speaker card, and he would be a better person to explain that.
We could wait till his card, or
okay,
at the mayor's discretion. He
Right,
could go
I mean, he
next.
can speak now. He's
Okay.
the next speaker anyway.
I have
Excellent.
a question.
Okay.
Your map. So some locations you mark pole located in residence landscaping. Why is that not a good location when it's residence landscaping?
It's even closer.
So for small cells facilities under California Public Utilities Code, the wireless carriers are looking to locate these facilities in the public right-of-way. Under 7901 CPUC, they are given, as a telephone corporation, a right to locate telephone lines within the right-of-way, and so they are looking for facilities within the right-of-way. Where there is landscaping, it's also closer to residences, since it's in their
So
front yard.
landscaping means it's not right of way, so you cannot
Correct. And it's also closer to residences.
apply the federal law to streamline. And then another question is,
I would like to state that with respect to the streetlight pole, it is in the public right-of-way. With this particular node, there is landscaping that somebody has planted within the right-of-way, and it's closer to a home. They did not necessarily want to rip out the landscaping with the new facility. This is located in the public right-of-way, the existing streetlight pole.
I mean, you are installing on top of light pole, so you are not going to touch landscaping anyway, right?
Typically, with each of these facilities, we are having the pole and the foundation replaced with the installation of the node. This is to ensure structural adequacy for the new facilities that are being installed at the top of the pole.
Oh.
And our existing streetlights don't have that structural capacity.
If I may
Okay.
add to that, here is an example as a photo simulation of the proposed location. As you can see, this is what's existing, and this is what Verizon Wireless is proposing. So they are replacing the street light with a different type of light pole that allows for a concealed equipment cabinet at the base of the pole with the light, with the antenna on the top, shrouded and concealed. If that
Okay. So a question is, why do you specifically need coverage in the northeast corner of Jollyman Park? Because residences, when they are at home, usually everyone would have Wi-Fi, and not everyone would need the cell phone's signal. They can choose to. But then, so why specifically did you have complaint about that area?
Brian Ung is our Verizon Wireless radio frequency engineer who's responsible for this area, so he'll be able to answer the demand question.
Hello, Mayor and City Council members. So the capacity need is in addition to coverage, right? So both go hand in hand. If we have a coverage, then it'll be fine. But once they go in building, it could be a little bit troublesome. But like you said, you have alternative sources like Wi-Fi, right? But for capacity, right, if you happen to be on the street surfing the net or doing any other data work, you would put a burden on the macro site. So the small cell was supposed to offload some of those burdens.
But you are installing this in residential area where most people, when they get home, their phone, your switch would switch to Wi-Fi.
Correct.
Right? So this area, you don't have coverage issue. Is that true? You will need this only to increase capacity.
Once you leave the house, you will no longer be served by your Wi-Fi. Your signal will degrade. You then depend on the macro.
There are not a lot of people who will be using cell phone in this location outside of the house. So I don't understand why this particular area you need more data coverage, not east of the Jollyman Park, not west of Jollyman Park, not north, not south. Why specifically northeast of Jollyman Park?
It's not
You
just
need
Jollyman.
extra
It's not
coverage.
just Jollyman Park. Anywhere that we have deficiency, and it's your opinion that people do not use the phone when they leave the house when they're not connected to Wi-Fi. That's not true. Right? If it's true, then I wouldn't be doing
On our residential street, there are no commercial. There are not people who will be sitting outside of their home using cell phone. Not likely.
So even if you do not interact with the phone is still communicating with your social network and other function. It's doing stuff on its own.
So does this area have specific complaint of people that it doesn't have data coverage?
Yes. The Cupertino have a lot of deficient area coverage-wise.
Oh, not coverage, data capacity.
Yes.
So this area already has coverage, correct?
No, this area's coverage is very deficient.
So the coverage is issue also. So what's the coverage radius for a small cell?
The small cell coverage radius is about 700 to 900 feet or so. The macro is a lot bigger, maybe about a mile.
So
700 to 900.
where is the macro cell that covers this area currently?
There's one on Blue Hill on Prospect. Then this one here in City Hall, right? And there's another one on the Stevens Creek and 280.
Okay.
So the residents suggested an alternative location that's over the overpass of 85. So is
I can answer
area
that.
not acceptable?
The overpass in 85 is a structure owned by Caltrans. The city does not have a right to permit for that facility or that location because you would have to go to Caltrans, get a structural analysis of the bridge, and get a permit from them to do that work.
But doesn't the FCC regulation apply to Caltrans too? It's public right of way. They are supposed to streamline the application as we do.
I would imagine it does relate to Caltrans as well, but I'm not sure what kind of agreements that Verizon has in place for those facilities.
So I guess Caltrans question assigned, would that location be okay for you?
So we haven't done a deep dive into the Caltrans location, but on initial assessment, there are some concerns we have with pulling both power and fiber to it, and also we haven't been able to assess whether from a radio frequency perspective this would achieve the coverage objective that we're trying to aim for.
So you haven't considered that location?
No, it's outside of this area that we had reviewed.
So how big is 300 feet? I mean, you said the coverage is 900 feet, right? Because why are you only considering residential area? Why aren't you not considering
I should make it clear that this is just one residential application. I currently have about 20 applications in from both Verizon, AT&T, and other providers for these facilities to go in areas potentially outside of commercial areas. We're not talking about just one location here. We're talking about citywide.
So there are 20 similar applications right now? for 20 different locations.
That is correct, from the various providers.
Yeah, so this is a circle, right? And
So Chad alluded to earlier, as part of the process, the applicant is required to notice within a radius of 300 feet from the selected location. So as you can see, this is part of our noticing affidavit and a map that identifies the location of the pole and the 300-foot radius and all of the properties that were noticed for this project. I can zoom in if it's more helpful.
because I don't understand is why you only consider alternative location within this very limited area instead of a much wider area, like there are roads and.
So as Chad said, this is one node in a placement of us working on building out our network.
Mm-hmm.
So there are other nodes that we have planned in the surrounding area as well to address those coverage and capacity areas. So moving one node then requires movement of other nodes.
So is this going to be a 5G node?
This is currently, as it's designed, a 4G node.
Well, right. Will this be a 5G node was the question, when 5G is deployed.
I can't speak to that right now. We don't have any current plans to make this a 5G node as it's submitted right now.
Personally, I envision nearly all of these nodes eventually being 5G, whether it's 5, 10, 15 years down the road. I imagine most of them will be 5G network, 5G nodes.
Right. You know, the thing with capacity, I know that Verizon and and T-Mobile that don't have fiber to the home in this area, I know they are planning to sell additional services that require the higher capacity, even though it may not be necessary at this time. AT&T has a little less of a need for it, especially here since they do have fiber. Comcast also has fiber to the home, I think in most of the city, I'm not sure. I know they're always behind my house streaming fiber. Did anyone else have any questions, John?
Yeah. So, is there anything that says putting the pole in the middle of the park, is that going to in any way affect the effectivity of your antenna? I mean, when it's directly across the street and it's 40 feet, 60 feet from the house, by moving it to the middle of the park, you've multiplied that by like 6 times the distance. So is there any reason that that would not be just as effective for you?
So, we drove by the park today, we stopped by the park, and the middle of the park is very empty. So, I mean, potentially we could put a small cell facility in there. However, the process to go within the park, we don't have a agreement with the city for installing within the park. And also our understanding is that it would go through a different permitting process, which would be like a development permit, essentially a conditional use permit, which would require going through planning as well. So the shorter answer is we may need to be at a higher height than we are currently at. And if we also looked at some of the lights that were in the park as well, and they're much shorter and they're a different design. So it would require potentially replacing one of those lights and going over there as well.
So two answers or comments. So number one, we're the people that can facilitate, getting that permitting process streamlined for you. The pictures that you previously showed with the existing light pole versus a new light pole, you're already ripping out a light pole to install. So whether it's one inside the park or it's one on the sidewalk, I mean, to me, that's a non-issue in terms of that. As long as it does what you're interested in doing, I really want to see the arguments as to why it wouldn't work.
Okay. We also did explore we are interested in some feedback on exploring the opportunity of, sorry, can you put up this picture as well? of where the candidate pole is right here, if the public right-of-way is, depending on where the public right-of-way falls over here, potentially putting a streetlight on this edge, which would, it seems like from being there that it would be further back.
But there you're talking about 50% versus in the middle of the park. Like I say, you've got 7 times the distance.
To a certain extent, if you're pushing these things further away, as was indicated by their RF engineer, they typically have a range of about 900 feet. So if we're pushing this further and further away from the area where they're trying to serve, you're either going to need a taller tower and or potentially additional power output. We're basically getting into the realm of a macro tower, and we've already seen the ramifications of a macro tower at the sports center, and I imagine we would have similar ramifications here.
I'd like to see those details before we jump to that kind of a conclusion. When we're talking about, I've drawn the little circle right there, and to me, that, well, now you've moved it.
Oh, sorry.
Over to where that little shadow is, a little bit more. But now, from the green dot to the houses versus the red dot to the houses, where you've kind of shown it right there, you've got about 5 or 6 times the length to that. That being said, if it does need to be 3 feet taller, 4 feet taller, you're replacing the pole anyway. In terms of the distance of that versus 900 feet range, I'd like to really hear why that would not be an acceptable location from Verizon. And if Verizon comes back technically with the numbers that show that that just absolutely doesn't work, I'll understand it. But I'd really like to not be jumping to conclusions without, that truly being calculated.
So, I'd point out that putting cell towers in parks is also very controversial. I know the city does allow it now. I remember when that was passed, but there's a lot of concerns, especially in parks, where a lot of kids are playing about having towers inside parks, just like in schools there's a concern.
The exposure time in a park versus the exposure time at home are different by magnitude.
That is definitely true.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I still have Eric Swanson's card here. Is he available?
Yes, he is.
Great. Welcome, Eric.
So, good evening. My name is Eric Swanson. I've been asked by CTIA to come and talk to you about health effects of 4G and 5G infrastructure.
Can you define CTIA?
Yes, it's a trade organization for the wireless industry. The letters don't mean anything, I've been told, so I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Justice Scalia asked the same question, by the way. My credentials are that I'm a physicist at the University of Pittsburgh. I have written more than 100 scientific papers on biophysics, condensed matter physics, and nuclear physics. I'm the author of 2 textbooks, some of which deal with these issues we're going to talk about. I'm a fellow of the American Physical Society. I helped found a division of the American Physical Society. I've given several hundred talks in about 25 countries around the world. What we're talking about is radio waves from 4G and 5G infrastructure, and radio waves are part of the spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. Other parts would be, say, microwaves or light, the light in this room, the light, natural light outside, X-rays, and maybe you've heard of gamma rays. The only difference between these different parts of the spectrum is the frequency of the electromagnetic radiation. So when you talk about one part of the spectrum, you are basically talking about all of it except for the frequency dependence. There are 2 health effects that concern all of us when it comes to electromagnetic radiation. One of them is called ionizing radiation. So radiation above a certain frequency, above a certain threshold, is dangerous. And you are probably aware of this. If you spend too long outside, you get tan, And if you spend way too long outside, you might be putting yourself in danger of getting skin cancer. And the reason for that is that natural light has a lot of ultraviolet radiation in it, and that radiation is high frequency, and high frequency radiation is dangerous. Higher frequency radiation, higher than that, is X-rays, so you shouldn't expose yourself to X-rays too much. And even higher is gamma rays, but you don't need to worry about that unless you work right next to a nuclear power plant. Lower frequency radiation is called non-ionizing, so light is just a little bit lower than visible light. It's just a little bit lower in frequency than ultraviolet radiation. It is not dangerous. It doesn't cause skin damage. It doesn't cause cancer. The lights in this room don't produce ultraviolet radiation. You could spend 24 hours a day under these lights, 365 days a year, and you will not get tan, you will not get cancer. And the reason for that relies on a physical effect, but I just want to focus on what you're familiar with. Below a certain frequency, it's safe, and above a certain frequency, it's dangerous. The waves that we're talking about, 4G, is about 300,000 times on the safe side of the equation, and 5G is about 30,000 times on the safe side of this limit. So there's no problem.
Please finish up in the next 30 seconds.
Okay. So the other health effect is thermal radiation, is thermal effects. So this radiation does heat you. That is strenuously regulated by the FCC. The limits are extremely conservative. Of course, all the equipment you have that's either installed in towers or in your pockets is regulated and checked to make sure it adheres to those limits and are very safe. Just to give you an example of what this is, if you go outside, again, light is electromagnetic radiation, it would be about 16 times higher than permitted by the FCC. If you have any questions on any of these issues, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Next.
I have a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
So as I was trying to ask earlier, my understanding is that this device I'm absorbing many, many, many times more RF energy just by carrying this device with me than from any cell tower nearby, whether it's a large one or a small one. Can you comment on that?
Sure. It depends on the details, some of which are you just carrying it and then it just pings towers slowly. If you're using it, it's producing more energy. Depends on how close you are to macro towers and whether they're macro or small cell. But roughly speaking, they do expose you to more electromagnetic energy than the towers do.
Okay, and I've also heard it said that if the tower is close to me, that my phone having adaptive transmission power, if it has to work less hard to get to a nearby tower, I'm exposed to substantially less, maybe an order of magnitude less power.
That's correct.
Than if that tower is far away and it has to work.
That's correct.
Work harder. Right. That's true too?
That's true. The more bars you have, the less power your phone is using, and the less you're exposed to as a result.
Okay.
And I just stress again, all of that, the stuff you're exposed to is regulated by the FCC and is extremely conservative.
Yes. And so we heard that this is an engineering question. I only have a bachelor's in physics and a couple degrees in electrical engineering. So
okay. I better be
maybe
careful.
I'm out of the realm of, I was looking you up online and looking at quarks and other things I never quite grokked as an undergrad. If I have for a typical 4G cell here, we're hearing 700 and 900 feet.
Yes.
And my belief is I've read that a 5G, probably at a higher frequency, the distance is more typically 500 feet. Are you familiar with the difference here?
Yes.
As technology is evolving, the cells are actually getting smaller, the frequencies are getting somewhat higher, and what that's doing is allowing a finer mesh, which means the frequencies can be replicated, reused essentially.
Right, and there are other effects too. So the higher the frequency, the more rapidly you can transmit data, and people are hungry for throughput with their devices. So these frequencies are about 10 times higher, and you put all the effects together, you might get roughly a factor of 100 increase in data throughput.
And I've also heard it mused that given the spacing of light poles in Cupertino and 5 or 6 carriers that are interested, in 5 years we might have a small cell on pretty much every pole in Cupertino. Does that make any sense to either you or you?
I can comment on that. The plan is, as you said, to put these things very close together. It could be something like 200 feet between these. Now, of course, the power is going down dramatically compared to the very large.
The closer it is, or the less the radius that you expect it to cover, the lower the power.
Right.
Yeah.
So there could be a lot of them, and maybe instead of health concerns, there might be larger issues like, aesthetic concerns.
Yeah.
How many of these do you want per pole, or, what
Who are the fifth and sixth carrier?
Over to you guys.
I think that's a question for Chad.
I have a T-Mobile phone. They laughed at me when I said that.
So do I.
We have 5 agreements in place, AT&T, Verizon, we have Crown Castle, Mobility, and
Okay, so those are
Estimates.
companies that are
and
putting in
so-
towers but not operating
Yes,
their own.
Exactly. I mean, I guess the other one could
Okay.
potentially be Sprint and/or T-Mobile,
Right,
depending on how
okay.
that shakes out.
Yeah, that was a question I didn't know whether.
I have a related question. So these small cells are going to be installed by AT&T, but then will Sprint come along, another company comes along, and they all want their small cell. Does the one pole can only accommodate one carrier, or can it
I can comment on
accommodate
that,
more
but
like
do you
those
guys-
small, like
do you
those
want to
cell tower, the micro cells?
Currently, the designs that I've seen only accommodate one carrier at a time. It's possible in the future, as equipment gets smaller, we could potentially co-locate facilities. But for right now, we're looking at one carrier at a time.
So that means tomorrow, this is Verizon, the AT&T will come, they want the next pole, the light pole. Someone else will come, they want the next light pole.
That is correct.
So there is no end to this.
I envision nearly every pole within the city having a small cell on it in 20 years.
Unless we all turn off our cell phones, in which case
So
I guess they won't be interested.
What if we all use Verizon but nothing else, then we would not, we will be 9 times many small cells, right? If there are 10 different carriers, we would have to install 10 times of the capacity that we even need, because these 10 people are fighting for our business, and they all want higher capacity, so they all want a lot more than they need. So this
Right,
this
yeah,
doesn't make
that's
sense.
correct. Okay.
Why can we say we would only do it? Can we limit the number of contracts that we have with companies? We can't.
No, federal regulations would not permit us to basically ban a certain provider from coming in and putting in small cells.
Okay.
There are regulations in place for that.
So I have a question regarding the cell that's right here, the micro cell. You said that each one has about 20 to 40 watts. But I see like 12 or maybe 24 on that pole. Does that
This pole
multiply that
outside?
by, does that multiply?
Oh, the pole outside is a macro facility, and it holds right now Verizon and AT&T.
So
Both carriers are on there.
what's the watts that's generated by that? If we see one, you said it's 20 to 40, but I see
macro-
like there are like 12 or 24.
Why don't you let him answer?
Our micro radios usually output 40 watts, and then you add antenna gain on top of that. So the antenna gains is usually about 14 to 15 dB. So the effective radiated power is basically the radio output plus the antenna gain, because it is much higher off the ground, relative to people underneath. We were able to radiate a lot more power compared to the small cell, which is about 10 times less power.
So have you measured the radiation from that pole after its installation?
Yes.
So-
The desktop analysis is done before we even turn anything on.
Mhm.
And once it's turned on, they do the post-analysis measurement. And that usually, because the analysis is the worst-case scenario. In the real life, it's probably 100 times less power. So it usually comes much, much less than the desktop, which is worst case scenario. Worst case scenario.
And we are happy, as Chad mentioned, we are happy to offer post-EME testing for the node once it's turned on for the Jollyman neighborhood as well.
And the city offers that also, right? You mentioned it in the staff report. You mentioned the city would offer it if any residents would like it to be tested?
That is correct. When the node goes online, within 30 days, the applicant is required to provide us a post-testing report to verify it's within the FCC limits. During that testing period, they will notify any residents within 100 feet, and if they want somebody to come in and test, at their front door or maybe in their bedroom, they have that option.
But only within 30 days of installation. What if after 3 months they turn it off? Can the residents come to us and say we would like it tested again?
That's not in the agreement. I mean, we could ask the applicant to come and test it again if we feel there's been a modification, but I can't require them to come test every month and verify it's within limits.
The public was they would like the city to test it, not the applicant. So is that possible?
So the applicant hires a third-party engineering firm to come out and do that testing, somebody that's not directly affiliated with Verizon, and they are required to use their engineering stamp to verify that the information is correct.
So can we require maybe an annual testing with the agreement? So annually they can test it because maybe the equipment might degrade over time. And
I mean, at this point in time, we're not requiring that, and the federal government has not required any stipulation for annual testing. Just so that you're aware, we have a small cell installed down at Bollinger. That was tested. It is at 0.084% the FCC limit. The macro tower that's located over at Cupertino High was tested. It's about 0.13% the FCC limit. I mean, we are extremely way under the FCC limits with respect to power output.
I've heard okay.
Typical testing finds that, for example, if that tower out there results about 1,000 times lower than the FCC limit. And just to remind you, your exposure to that light right there is higher than the FCC limit.
Okay.
I have heard the FCC standard is much lower, much higher than the European standard. Is that true?
No, they're very similar to each other. There's slight differences in the volume that you make these measurements in, the amount of time, but they're very similar.
All right, thank you. I want to move on to the last two speakers, Fariba, followed by Lisa Warren. Welcome, Fariba.
Hello, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council members. I am going to show you this picture. I'm not sure if this will show. Yeah. Here it says that the radio frequency fields beyond this point may exceed...
Please speak into the microphone.
Yes.
Thank you.
That the radio frequency fields beyond this point may exceed FCC general public exposure limit. This is the T-Mobile that's placed in Memorial Park, and I'm not so sure if this initially they had this sign there or not. So how do we know that all these cells and towers and all that are being placed, they upgrade it, they add more to it, and how do we know that in the long run, we won't have similar exposures. So here, and this sign was actually hidden on the inside of this big machine. So I think if they are tested, if we are all tested annually, that would make sense because they change the machine, they add to it. So this is saying that it exceeds the FCC limits. When does the council members have a system where these machines that are installed, they are checked? I mean, how can this be allowed even if it exceeds the FCC limit? I mean, there has to be something in place where the public is protected. And this is in a park. As Mayor said, these should not be in a park to begin with. And I have been in Commons of Cupertino since 2007, and I don't actually even know when this thing was built and placed there. There has to be a system of checking annually. Otherwise, something like this will happen and we're exposed, and unless I had gone to the other side, I wouldn't have seen this sign. And something should be done about T-Mobile as it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last speaker, Lisa Warren.
Thanks. Real quick, you'll be happy to know. I'm wondering if, and maybe this isn't the appropriate time to ask, but I'm sure there's people who heard Chad speak about the additional 20 applications at this time, and that there's an expectation that every light post will have one of these things on it. It would be nice if the city could somehow share where these proposed locations are in the existing 20 applications. Because as we all know, there's competition between providers, and I've been made aware, I don't frequent this particular place in Bollinger and Miller, but I've been made aware that there's sort of a competition of antennas on top of a building in that strip mall that I don't know what the effects of it are, but the aesthetics apparently are not very good. Also, what I initially wanted to just bring up, and it probably won't be answered now, but I think it's something that people should think about. Often when you get, more often than should happen in my opinion, when you get a utility bill of any type, there is an added charge for equipment upgrades. There's no explanation as to what that upgrade is. I've called before and said, what did you upgrade? And why is it costing me more? It's a cost of doing business to upgrade your technology. You know, you're making a huge profit off of us. Use that money to upgrade your services. So I wonder, and I am a Verizon carrier for now, but I wonder if things like that are going to be passed on to each and every one of us at some point. And it's worth noting, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, I actually have one more card here. Paul Alberton. Welcome, Paul.
Good evening. Paul Albritton, outside counsel for Verizon Wireless, and I felt I needed to step up. Haven't been before you since we got the approval of the site here out in City Hall. And I think you know that through that experience and our experiences putting sites at Bollinger and Miller, that it is always going to be a controversial issue regarding the location of cell towers, wireless facilities in Cupertino. We actually looked at this park at that time as for a macro site, and that was deemed to be infeasible. But I think the important thing to know is that Cupertino is using a great deal of data. As our RF engineer explained, we already have the information to show that we're reaching capacity with our macro sites. That's the reason we need to put these small cells in order to provide for that capacity. And actually to reduce, as you indicated, reduce the emissions that are on the ground from your phone by putting facilities immediately or near the end users. The network is designed with small cells to minimize the total number of poles that we put in order to provide the service that we provide. When we start moving poles around, then we need to add poles to fill in the holes. And that's how this particular location was decided. And in addition, working with Chad, all of these areas have been reviewed on foot to determine which pole is going to have the least impact. In this case, it's across the street instead of being in the landscaping in front of somebody's house. And so it's been very carefully selected. If we move the pole into the park, we're going to have issues of coverage that are going to affect whether we need to add yet another pole in this neighborhood to provide the kind of coverage. We're happy to look at that and provide the information to Chad to clarify all of that. We are willing to do post-installation testing. These are very low wattage facilities. They're 1/10 of the wattage of something like this. With two carriers, it's probably 1/20th of the wattage. And as a result, the emissions from these facilities is extremely low. There's no way, without getting another permit, that we could modify this to exceed the calculated FCC standard that we have to provide to the city. I can go into depth on that, but there's no way that it can creep up over time. So annual testing really doesn't make any sense, and there's a court in Los Angeles that says it's not in the purview of cities to do that. We are willing to do post-installation testing to absolutely confirm that it complies. I appreciate the opportunity to speak before you. I think I've covered the points that I needed to cover, but I wanted you to know that we did come in with applications 2 years ago for utility poles. We worked with Chad over the last several years not to put up those ugly poles, to come up with a really ideal design. I don't know if you've seen them, but these poles are really an ideal aesthetic design in order to have really the best solution for Cupertino with the least aesthetic impact, with the minimum number of poles, but providing that service. Our data shows that wireless service on phones spikes over weekends, and particularly weekend evenings. So we know that people are using their cell phones at home, at night, even though they have Wi-Fi networks, and the demand with autonomous cars and everything else is continuing to increase. So we appreciate your help in putting this marvelous network into Cupertino. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that is it for the public comment. I can bring it back to council if anyone has any more
I certainly
to say.
have a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm going to tell you about my experience. These large towers generate a lot of controversy. They take a lot of time. We spend a lot of time in public hearings. And several years ago, we looked at a threat from the telecom industry, basically trying to preempt everything we did as a city to try to get some aesthetic into these small cells. There was a bill in the state legislature called SB 649. Those of you in the industry were pushing it. We're well familiar with that. There was stiff opposition from the League of California Cities. We happened to be up the week that it was going to debate and through the legislature. There were hundreds of us standing on the steps of the Capitol because what that bill would have enabled by right is 35 cubic feet of stuff, right? That's what Chad showed on that diagram. So we looked at that and said, yikes, this is terrible. This could go on any utility pole. City has absolutely no discretion in location whatsoever. And we said, okay, what's coming down the pike here? Chad took a leadership role on this and said, how can we construct a technology base for Cupertino in the future that looked like something that we could at least tolerate from an aesthetic perspective? So we wouldn't have 35 cubic feet of, there was no beer tap on that box hanging up on the pole, but really bad, right? Just no good for cities. Ideally, right, we'd underground all the equipment and all, but we reached a compromise a couple years ago, and at that very set of meetings, Chad Mosley was on a panel with the vice president of AT&T for California who said, okay, you ought to all look to the model that we're working out with Cupertino. Cupertino city staff is taking the lead in trying to be constructive and figure out how we can facilitate deployment of these 5G cells in a reasonable way that comports with a consistent look across the city. That, folks, is what our city staff has done for us. And when the council as a whole took this up shortly thereafter, we said we'd like to see these agreements go forward in this way rather than contesting every tower at every location, because it's a losing battle. And as you've heard, with a range of, who knows, in the future, 500 feet, even 200 feet, we really, I believe, in the next 5 years, due to whether we like it or not, because of FCC's preemption, we're going to have small cells all over the city. And we're all going to take advantage of it. I know we are. Even the people that don't like it, who come up and they read their remarks off of their phone, are going to take advantage of that. And it may be that you'll profit economically because you can pull the plug on your wired internet provider and you'll simply be receiving signal over 5G for the streaming you do and everything else. So we all use it, more or less. I have yet to find a student at one of our high schools that isn't carrying a cell phone or isn't surrounded by kids who are. And what's the best we can do is really the question that the council had to grapple with a couple years ago. So what's the story about SB 649? It passed the Assembly, it passed the Senate. That was in September of 2017. Governor Brown heard about the leadership of cities like Cupertino in finding a constructive alternative to 35 feet of garbage up on a pole. And what did he do? He vetoed the bill. So the FCC is still working on federal mandates that would preempt any action by the state as well as local governments. But here in Cupertino, I have to say that I'm very proud that our city staff worked so hard to find a compromise. And now we are cited, both in the governor's office and by other local governments, in trying to find constructive solutions to this. Okay? So there are cities now adopting this common light pole model that we pioneered with the carriers. So what I would suggest to my colleagues and to you is we have a leading solution here. We can fight every pole. We can decide we want to rescind all those actions of the council, a year or two ago. We can try to rip up the contracts we have with carriers. I'm not sure that works so well. They probably might not say. So that the ship has sailed, okay? And our best approach, I think, here is to be very thoughtful about the battles we pick in the interest of enabling our city to be connected and do that with grace rather than fighting every one of these and saying, my kid's going to die of radiation. I mean, I get it. But then you ought to be consequent, and you really ought to talk about why you have these things in your house, and you ought to talk about why you have a Wi-Fi router in your house. And you ought to get rid of them if you really think it's a problem. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
John, anything?
I'll be respectful, but I'll say, I liked what you said. What's the best we can do? And I don't believe it's ignoring when we can make an improvement. Nobody here is pushing back against the light pole approach. All we're doing is listening to the residents and trying to say what's the best we can do on where to put it. And to twist that into something else is wrong. What's the best we can do? Let's just look. Thank you.
Okay, Darcy?
Can you bring up the picture of the exemplars that you've put up in Cupertino?
You talking about the
ones that
the bad ones?
No, the good ones.
The good ones.
Well,
okay.
not the good ones, but the current ones. It is up. Okay.
There. Okay.
Okay. So this has an equipment box, but these two don't. So what determines whether there's an equipment box there?
So the two on the left, the equipment's actually screened behind existing signs so that it's relatively streamlined.
I'm sorry, existing signs? So you're saying that the equipment is here and here, is that right?
It's behind the signs on the pole.
Well, then how is the equipment so much smaller where the signs are already there?
So when we came up with this design that you see in front of us, we had the two options. The one where we would place equipment on the pole and do what we could to screen it behind the signs. And the other was to provide equipment within the base of the pole. I worked with Verizon, AT&T, Mobility, and Crown Castle at the time to figure out what minimum dimensions were necessary to house each of the providers' equipment. I think at that point in time, the equipment that was being considered by Sprint required the dimensions that you see there. Verizon, AT&T, and I think even T-Mobile at the time had much smaller equipment. And so we could potentially reduce the size of that box at the bottom for certain carriers. But if Sprint were to come in with the equipment they had, they would need that size. With respect to having homogeneous facilities, we decided to go with the same size for everybody so that things don't look weird.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess I should also commend you for the work that you've done to, make it more aesthetic. It certainly. I was on the council as well and supported the action that we took in order to try to help to resolve this issue. And I should say it was precisely for this reason. We were trying to make it so that it was streamlined and able to adhere to some of the residential concerns with regard to if you see a big cell tower facility, perhaps that would tend to invoke more of those sentiments. The lingering question I have is with regard to these equipment boxes, because so for this particular example, this is a bit away from the street and the sidewalk, but I think in San Jose along De Anza, it seems like it's in Cupertino, but I think it's actually on the San Jose side. There are some, or there's at least one that's very close to the street, and it looks fairly obtrusive. So if we're putting these into various residential areas, and some look like the equipment box is larger and unwieldy, I think it would tend to have more of that kind of aesthetic effect. So that's why I'm trying to get a sense of whether there is some uniformity between something that's of this size and something that's hidden behind a relatively small sign. But in terms of putting the small cell tower on top of the pole, I think it's an elegant solution. And I agree with Councilmember Sinks' sentiment that a good job was done with regard to making sure that we're not looking at a lot less wieldy and frankly uglier, cell tower facilities. But that doesn't, just in terms of the ability to make that equipment box smaller, I'm not really clear. I'm not really clear on understanding why, for the ones that are in the middle of the pole, you can make it so much smaller than the ones that are at the base.
I thought he explained that the one with the big one is because Sprint's equipment needed more space.
But you didn't name Sprint as one of the carriers that we have an agreement with.
That is correct, but we did work with Mobility and Crown Castle at that time, who were working for Sprint, or at least intending to work for Sprint at that point in time, and so they had provided us some minimum dimensions to facilitate equipment.
Okay, so that box is basically a standard box that we're putting in anticipation of perhaps needing more space. But for the carriers or for the carrier that's currently putting it in, apparently it's not necessary to make it that big because this suffices for what they need. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. I'm not sure how equipment may have changed in the last couple of years, but my understanding is AT&T and Verizon could potentially use a smaller space to facilitate their equipment.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if it's a bit more aesthetically pleasing, especially and I'm sympathetic to the residents that live directly across the street from this facility. If it's more aesthetically pleasing for them to have an equipment box that's a bit higher up and not as obtrusive, then I would try to work with them on that. But in terms of having that large of a box, I mean, it just seems like a pretty strong difference. You can compare it when you're going up De Anza Boulevard right now, and you see one with an equipment box and you see one without it. It's actually quite a different visual effect.
I can work with the providers, AT&T and Verizon. We can come up with potentially a facility that would be attached to the pole further up, and we may be able to utilize that in areas where there is no signage to screen it.
Right.
We can come up with something that I think would look reasonable.
All right. If you're going to speak, you have to come up to the microphone, sir.
Okay. All right.
Okay, I have, I think the current notification is 300 feet around the pole. Is that requirement by the FCC, or can we increase that radius?
That is a requirement that the city established when we were first beginning with this process. There were not many other cities that were ahead of the game on this. San Francisco had a radius of 300 feet, and there was another city, I don't recall what it was now, who was also doing 300 feet. Since then, there have been a number of other cities with varying degrees, anywhere from 250 feet notification up to, I understand, potentially 600 feet notification circle.
So if there is no FCC regulation, we can potentially increase that to 900 feet since the coverage is 900 feet?
I could work with providers to see what we could do, but there was a requirement by the FCC that established April 15th, 2019 as kind of a deadline to have standards in place. And after that, there are certain ways that the providers could potentially fight any requirements that we enact.
As I understand, Palo Alto, the city of Palo Alto rushed to get something adopted by the council before April 30th. At that time, I actually asked the city staff, do we need to also adopt something before April 30th? The information I got was we already have something in place. We don't have to adopt anything. But then now I'm just getting it now. We should have looked at this so that the council could get involved and maybe review the policy. And I just learned yesterday that there was policy in place, but not adopted by the council, just determined by staff, never published for the public to review.
That's not true. The council adopted the policy.
There was some agreement, but it was not in the municipal code. Right.
It is not in the municipal code. The staff is not actually required to notify anybody. We are doing the notification as a courtesy, so that people are aware of what's going on.
Are you passing those costs on to the carrier for notification?
Yeah, the carrier is actually the one performing all the legwork and the mailing for the noticing.
And with regard to the light poles, they're paying for the light poles, correct? And they're also paying rent to put their equipment on those poles. So it would be possible to increase that radius to 500 feet, correct?
The notification radius?
Yes.
Potentially.
Because
I would have to look into see what.
It's not something that we've required. It's not something that we've said in any kind of a resolution or municipal code that the radius of notification would be this. And since it's not actually coming from the public till, you could essentially pass that cost onto the carrier.
This is true.
And then with respect to trying to make sure that the aesthetics at least are more palatable, because truly if you're looking at so many different light poles throughout the entire city, at least thinking about bringing back to us a suggested policy change where if it is really fairly close to a residential area or residences, to reach out and give people the option as to what kind of aesthetic impact that it will have, particularly with regard to these equipment boxes, whether they're going to be large and bulky and on the bottom. I mean, I think there's a psychological impact as well, because even though the radiation is coming off the top, I mean, you see this relatively large equipment box, and you tend to think that, well, this is where my hazard is emanating from, legitimate or no. So that's what I would recommend in terms of trying to put a bit more outreach to people throughout the city.
Well, I kind of think residents understand that the radiation's coming from the
they're
antenna,
aesthetics.
not the box.
I think our hands are tied, but it's our obligation to be more transparent, to inform the residents as much as we can, and especially. If there is no FPPC regulation on the radius, why can't we increase the radius? And I'm really struggling with the fact that the policy was not even codified. It was a courtesy notice, and we didn't even require that notification. That's, I cannot understand. The Palo Alto policy, when I looked at it, it was around April. As I remember, they even require applicant to notify residents before they even submit application, and they have to provide affidavit of their notification method so that residents really get informed before they even submit the application. And then another thing they had, as I remember, is the equipment. They require that if there are newer equipment that would reduce the radiation, reduce the volume, they are required to replace the equipment to be the best available. I don't know if it's legal to require that, but that was what their council adopted. And then I just learned today, we were not even given the chance to consider this as a council.
So
I
the
cannot-
previous design, I mean, the design that we have in Cupertino is a set design that facilitates everybody's equipment. We could require smaller sizes for different carriers, but then we would have basically a hodgepodge of different looking facilities. Our goal at the time was to find a design that was homogeneous and was consistent so that we had a uniform look throughout the city.
I think Palo Alto is, I don't know if they are requiring different dimension for different cellular, but then it's like in 5 years, maybe the technology, since it advances so fast, there would be equipment that would be 1/3 the size. Then they will be required to replace all the poles with the one that's smaller in size. So that was their requirement because they can choose not to do that. But then that's part of their ordinance. So, and then we can make that a uniform requirement for all carriers also. But that wasn't considered. So that's something I hope to bring back. I don't know if we can still consider that if we lost the chance, and I hope the city attorney can look into that. And another thing is, if I just learned today there are 20 sites already identified. I guess Verizon identified all the sites for small cells altogether so that they have a coverage of network. Then we need to let the residents know what are all the sites they have identified, not just one here, there, and that's just give them all the information we have. And if AT&T have identified multiple sites, where are they? Why are we not being transparent with our residents? Our hands are tied, yes, but why are we not upfront with our residents?
I mean, at this point in time, we've received applications. We've actually notified residents for a number of these applications, and we have just not issued permits for construction.
And so I would like, can we have a web page that lists all of the applications so that at least there is one go-to place in the city? Anyone interested can go and check, here are all the potential applications. And if Verizon has they probably have their internal plan, everything mapped out, but they only tell us one location at a time. Can we work with them? Give us all the location that you are planning to put so that we have, so that we won't be trying to move them around because they have a network.
Yeah, with respect to the GIS, we're working on that right now. We hope to maybe have something implemented sometime in the near future. With respect to notifying, those are trade secrets. Verizon doesn't want AT&T to know where their facilities are. AT&T the same way. Same with T-Mobile. I mean, they give us what they give us, and we can't require them to give us more. There are certain, I mean, they don't want somebody to come in before them and ask for a certain location. There's
We can require, but then we are working, we have a good working relationship with them, right?
Yeah, but if we post that
So
publicly, then
we can
AT&T
try.
knows where it's at, or vice versa. I mean, you're asking us to post this publicly, but I can't do that.
But then all the application eventually will be public. All the application will eventually be public knowledge.
Yeah, as they come in, we can post that on GIS, but you know where they're thinking about for the next 100, I
So
can't
they
do
don't
that.
want to tell us that. Okay. Another thing I'd like to request, can we set up an email notification item in the e-notification for any member of the public? They can sign up. Then whenever there is any application on anywhere in the city, a person can get notified. They don't have to be right next to a cell, so that we are transparent on the
I'm sure we can do
process.
that, and I'll work with Bill Mitchell.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything else. Anyone else have anything else? Okay, it is 8:40. We've been going for 2 hours. We're an hour behind schedule. So let's take
Just to catch up, we are going to increase the radius of notification, right?
I will look into that option to see what we can do and what we can't do. The FCC docket has set certain restrictions on modifications to our guidelines after a certain date, and I'll look and see what options.
Oh,
are
and one thing, one thing is mentioned that, okay, even if people got notified, they are within 300 feet right now. They have to respond within 30 days, and they are responding to the applicant, not to the city. So
they're required to respond to the applicant, but as my experience has been, we're also getting notified as well.
Okay, so if they happen to be out of town for that 14 days, they're out of luck.
As indicated in the staff report, we listen to any input that's provided, even after the date. What we're doing is trying to establish a deadline so that we can continue working towards getting to a permit application within the shot clock deadline.
Okay.
But just to make it clear, we're taking this input, we can make changes to the website, but we have these pending applications now, and we have a requirement to process these applications and to issue permits.
Right. Okay.
Well, what about with respect to the equipment box? Are you going to be following up with the residents and the applicant in terms of perhaps shifting that upwards behind a sign?
I'll look into what options we can to come up with a streamlined facility on the pole. Well, and as it is, I've been limiting the box as much as possible because, it is a bit on the large side. There are certain, with respect to the box, there are certain site distance requirements, sight line requirements that I need to work with, which really limits our ability to utilize that design. So I appreciate your input, and I will look to see what we can do to come up with a streamlined option on the pole.
And not every pole will have a sign. So.
Exactly. I mean, we're going to get to that point where not every pole has a sign.
And then you're also going to see it from the other side anyway.
Yeah, I think if you go to De Anza Boulevard out here, you don't have to. I actually showed Darcy a picture of the back of the sign. There's a lot of stuff there. Mm-hmm. That's a big sign because it's on a major thoroughfare, right? But my guess is in a residential area, putting up a sign that would only cover half of it, or even a sign sandwich is going to be, it's probably not going to be desirable.
We have those super ugly green boxes all over the city.
Well, that doesn't mean we should pile up.
I know, it doesn't mean we should put more, but, I mean, that base, it's a little large, but compared to those standalone boxes, which also, do these have fans going to in them? Because I know when I walk by those green AT&T boxes, they're noisy as well because their ventilation is going all the time.
Yeah, some of these have fans in them. I've actually heard them in the middle of summer with the equipment on. They're whisper quiet and well below the noise ordinance. I mean, if you go 10 to 15 feet away, you can't hear it. But again, as Darcy had recommended, we'll look to see what we can do to come up with a streamlined version to place these on the pole.
All right, thank you.
So one last comment, sorry,
Last
I
one.
promise. I have my cell phone here, but then when I go home, I turn the data network off. And that's when I have at most 2 gigabytes capacity. And so I don't want to waste it. I don't watch video on that. And my son, he didn't get his cell phone. He's just entering college. He didn't get his cell phone until last year. You don't have to be dependent on technology, and it's our personal choice. And now a lot of cell carriers, they offer unlimited data. You don't even have choice to say, I want a 2 gigabyte plan. They are encouraging us to use more and more data when we don't have to. And now they are complaining that there is not enough capacity, but it's a result of them encouraging everyone to use more data than necessary.
Well, it's not just that. It's that as soon as you give someone unlimited data, they don't bother to go on Wi-Fi even when they have it.
Yes.
And so the data usage is kind of artificially high because of that.
Yeah, and especially when you are at home, you don't have to use. Now,
okay, finish up.
Okay. And then we can have 10 carriers, 20 carriers. They all want higher capacity.
Okay, thank you. All right, we've been going for 2 hours exactly, so let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back and we'll do oral communications.